Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I've been farming around Cedar Hollow my whole life, so I thought I'd seen it all. Storms, deer tearing up crops, the occasional drunk kid driving through the field. But what happened last month threw me completely. I'm still not sure how to make sense of it. It started the morning I noticed the circle. I was out at first light, checking the wheat along the northern edge of the property, and I saw it. A near perfect ring, maybe 15 feet across, the stalks bent inward in a pattern so precise it looked like someone had rolled a giant log over them. No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing. The ground was undisturbed except for the circle itself. At first, I thought maybe it was kids messing around. I've had that before, though usually there's trash, tire marks, or at least the faint smell of cigarettes. None of that. Just the circle, pressed into the wheat like it had been laid out by hand. I took a few photos with my phone, but the image didn't capture the way the wheat seemed almost tense, like it was still holding some sort of shape. I set up motion sensor cameras the next night, thinking I could catch whoever, or whatever, was doing it. I put them around the perimeter of the circle and across the rest of the field, plugged them in, double-checked the batteries. I didn't expect anything, honestly. Cedar Hollow is quiet at night, mostly crickets, the occasional owl. When I came out the next morning, the cameras were off, completely disabled. Batteries dead, memory cards removed, or at least it looked that way. I swear I'd checked everything before leaving and nothing was loose or tampered with. The circle had grown slightly, maybe another couple feet in diameter. I don't know how it could have expanded that fast without anyone or anything disturbing the surrounding wheat. I reinstalled the cameras that night, more carefully this time. I even rigged a few with backup batteries and looped power from a small generator I keep in the barn. I figured maybe it was animals chewing the wires, though that seemed unlikely. Squirrels don't usually expand circles. The next morning, same thing. All cameras disabled around 3:14 a.m. right when the first light would start to brush the horizon. I didn't hear a thing. The generator was fine. Nothing tripped. And yet, every single camera that was pointed toward the circle was dead. By the third night, I decided to check the footage anyway. Even if the cameras were off, maybe there was something residual on the cards from before the shutdown. What I saw was, I don't know how to explain it. Static, white noise, flickering like an old TV, except there was movement in the center of the frame. A faint silhouette, tall and thin, shifting slowly. No features, just a shadow barely visible through the snow of the static. It moved in a way that didn't make sense, smooth, deliberate, almost floating. The circle in the wheat expanded slightly while it moved, like the wheat was bending under some invisible pressure. I watched it for hours, rewound, slowed it down, but every time I tried to focus on the figure, it faded into nothing, the static swallowing it whole. And yet the circle remained, perfectly round, the stalks bent in the same precise pattern. I called my neighbor, a retired cop named Ron, thinking maybe he'd seen something similar. He lives a mile down the road. He didn't answer the first time. When I finally reached him later that afternoon, he sounded off, like he'd woken from a deep sleep. He told me his lights had flickered all night and that he'd heard a low hum coming from the direction of my fields around 3 a.m. exactly. Same time the cameras died. I went back out that evening, trying to catch something in person. I stayed in the truck at the edge of the field, spotlight sweeping across the wheat, flashlight in hand. Nothing. No footprints, no tire tracks, no sound. Just the wind, which was light, just enough to ruffle the wheat outside the circle. I stayed until past midnight. The wind died. The truck battery started to drain faster than usual. Another strange occurrence. I turned the engine off, hoping the hum I'd felt before wouldn't come back. Then, around 3:12 a.m., I noticed movement. Something gliding near the circle, just at the edge. My flashlight caught a thin silhouette for maybe a second, too fast to get a good look, and then it vanished. Not into the trees, not behind the wheat. Just gone. The next morning, I checked the cameras again. Dead. Nothing recorded, nothing left behind. I looked at the circle. perfect as ever. Not a single stalk out of place. I stepped closer, hesitated, and the hairs on my neck stood up. The wheat swayed gently. There was no wind. I leaned down and touched it. It was warm, unusually so for the early spring morning. I tried to measure it over the next week. Each morning, the diameter shifted slightly, half an inch here, an inch there. I couldn't keep up. People in town noticed my absence, and a couple came by to ask what I was doing out in the fields at night. I just shrugged. Said I was dealing with some wiring issues on the barn lights. No one pressed further. I started sleeping in the barn, closer to the cameras, trying to catch something. Anything. The hum came back each night, faint at first, then louder, resonating in my chest. At times I'd see glimpses, shapes in the fog, shadows at the edge of the field, a soft ripple across the wheat like someone had just walked through, though the ground was firm, dry, undisturbed. One night, I fell asleep in the truck, watching the circle through the windshield. Around 3:15 a.m., my phone screen flashed blue briefly, then went black, battery draining to zero instantly. The circle seemed to twitch, subtle, like it was adjusting itself under my gaze. I blinked, and it looked the same. I tried the phone again. Nothing. I can't explain any of it. The cameras, the hum, the silhouette, the way the circle shifts slightly when I measure it. I can't even describe the figure properly. It's not human, but it moves like it is, and it's always just out of reach, always just at the edge of perception. Eventually, I had to stop watching every night. I couldn't sleep, couldn't work, and honestly, I started to feel like I was losing time. Some mornings I'd glance at the clock and hours had passed in a haze. No memory of moving, no sound of my steps. The circle is still there. I check it from the porch when I can. I haven't gone near it at night in over a week. The wheat sways gently, still no wind. And every time I try to tell anyone what's happening, I can see it in their eyes. They hear the words, but they don't believe. I don't know what's out there, if it's a person, a machine, or something else entirely. All I know is that the motion sensor cameras don't lie. Every morning, around the same time, something is in that field. Something that doesn't leave tracks, doesn't make sound, but leaves a circle behind and touches the air in a way that feels alive. I'm just hoping it doesn't decide to move closer. I was driving home late from a job site in southern Ohio. It was a Thursday in early October, cool but not yet cold, and the sky had cleared after a light drizzle that passed through earlier in the evening. The air still smelled damp, and the road was slick in patches. I'd finished up later than expected, and by the time I left the little town of Wellston, it was after midnight. My route took me along a two-lane road that cut through stretches of farmland and woods, the kind of road where you can drive for miles without seeing another set of headlights. I wasn't tired yet. I'd had too much coffee around 9, so I had the radio low, just background noise, and my windows cracked enough to hear the insects outside. That's why it stuck out to me when, around 1 in the morning, I noticed the hum of bugs seemed thinner. Not gone completely, but quieter than it should have been for a warm night out there. A couple miles later, I came around a bend where the trees pressed close to both sides of the road, like a tunnel, and that's when I saw them. Off to my right, maybe half a mile ahead and just above the tree line, was a row of lights, 6, maybe 7, lined up in a perfect horizontal line. They weren't beams, not like a searchlight. They were solid points, white with the faintest bluish tint, steady and unblinking. At first I thought it was a tower, except there was no structure under them. No blinking red marker like you usually see. And they weren't high. They were hovering just above the treetops, low enough that I could make out gaps between them where the dark sky showed through. I slowed the truck and kept watching, half expecting them to vanish or resolve into something ordinary. But they didn't move. They just hung there, silent. When the road opened into a stretch of flat ground, I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder. My headlights lit up the wet weeds and a barbed wire fence, and beyond that was just dark pasture running into the woods. The lights were still there, straight across, maybe 100 feet above the tallest trees. I killed the engine so I could hear better. That's when it hit me how quiet it was. No crickets, no night birds. Even the breeze seemed to have dropped. I remember thinking it was like someone had muted the world. I reached for my phone, which was sitting in the cup holder. My hands were shaking just enough that I fumbled unlocking the screen. I brought up the camera, pointed it through the windshield, and before I could snap the picture, the lights blinked out. Not one by one, not like they drifted away, just gone. The darkness over the trees was total. I sat there frozen, staring at where they'd been. The silence stretched out. I thought maybe they'd reappear, but nothing. Just that damp smell of earth and the faint pinging sound of the engine cooling under the hood. After a minute, I turned my phone flashlight on and stepped out. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof I hadn't imagined it, some angle where I could see them again. I walked to the fence and shined the light toward the pasture, but the beam didn't reach far before the dark swallowed it. I could see the tree line clearly, though. Nothing moved. I stood there longer than I meant to, waiting for something to happen, my ears strained for any sound at all. When it finally came, it startled me so bad I almost dropped the phone. A single crow croaked from somewhere back in the woods. Just one. Then nothing again. I climbed back in the truck and sat there with the doors locked, phone in my lap, headlights still off. My own breathing sounded too loud. I don't know how long I waited like that. Long enough that the windows fogged a little. Finally, I started the engine. The sound was harsh after that long silence, but it grounded me. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the road, keeping my eyes fixed ahead. I drove slower than usual, scanning the tree line in case the lights came back. They never did. But about 10 minutes later, I noticed something else. My radio had been on before, low volume, tuned to a classic rock station. When I left the job site, it was playing normally. But when I reached to turn it up again, there was nothing but static. Not the sharp hiss you get when you're between stations, either. It was a flat, steady crackle, almost like rushing air. I checked the dial, thinking maybe I'd knocked it somehow, but it was still set to the same station. I scanned across the whole band, and every frequency was the same, just that rushing static. I switched it off. By the time I hit the next small town, the static was gone and the stations came in fine. Streetlights, the glow from a gas station, a car pulling out ahead of me, normal things. But when I stopped to fill up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me those last miles. I got home around 3. I didn't sleep right away. I just sat at the kitchen table with the phone in my hand, scrolling back through my photos like maybe I'd find a picture I didn't remember taking. There wasn't one. The strangest part is how my memory of the lights feels. Clear, sharp, like I can still see the exact spacing between them. But everything around it, the drive after the gas station, even unlocking my front door, feels hazy, like it all happened underwater. I don't know what I saw out there. All I know is it wasn't a tower or a plane or anything I can explain. And the silence, when those lights went out, that's what stayed with me the most. Like the whole world held its breath until I drove away. The children were out in the corn by dusk, laughing and blinking like a string of lanterns. I had the screen door propped and was rinsing a dish at the sink when Tommy came tearing back first, boots clattering on the porch. He looked like every boy after a long chase, cheeks bright, hair plastered to his forehead, but he was pale in a way that didn't come from running. "Pa," he gasped, "there's a man in the corn." "Who's with you?" I asked, because you say that out of habit. "Who's with you? What did you do?" And he didn't answer for a second. His eyes were fixed on the field as if it might still be there. "Roger and Elsie ran to the house," he said. He asked me what year it was. "What did you tell him?" I set the dish down and felt the water chill. Tommy's voice went very small. I told him. He said it twice, like he'd forgotten. He swallowed. "He wore a hat like Mr. Hargreaves used to wear, like a fedora. He was tall. He was white, Pa, like he had no color." Mary came out from the kitchen then, wiping her hands on a towel. She saw Tommy's face and the way he kept looking over my shoulder and went still. "What about the others?" she said. "They ran," Tommy answered. "Elsie screamed when she saw him. He didn't shout or anything. He just said, 'What year is it?' and smiled." We looked at each other the way you do when something small has gone wrong and you are trying to find the sensible place to put it. The light had that thin quality right after the sun drops. The corn rusted to a darker green, the fireflies beginning again. I put my cap on and grabbed the lantern from the porch rail. "Stay here," Mary said to the children, though she didn't sound as sure as the words were supposed to be. I stepped into the field and took the rows, lantern held out so the light made a pale trail on the stalks. The corn husks whispered against each other. The faint smell of river muck and the general late summer sweat of everything out there filled my nose. I called, "Hello?" Low, the way you do when the place is supposed to be empty. My voice came back thin. The place where Tommy and the others said they'd been was a little wedge of flattened corn by the second row. The stalks lay like a small hand had smoothed them. It wasn't a big patch, only a few paces, but the way they bent was wrong, neat, not trampled. You could still see the dew on the leaves, and there were no footprints to speak of in the loam. When I knelt down, the dirt was dry on the surface, not like it's been pushed around by boots. There was a faint smear on a leaf, something like dust in a light crescent. I walked the rows for a while, calling the children's names. The sound of the lantern came back to me as if I were far away. The fireflies made a patchwork behind me, and a beetle clicked somewhere. At the edge of the field, near the old fence, Roscoe's ears pricked, and he gave one short bark. He didn't want to go in the grass. He wouldn't go. Roscoe is not a nervous dog. He does not usually decline a walk. I went back to the house when the children wouldn't calm down, and Mary kept telling them to go inside and wash their hands. We tried to make light of it. My sister thought of ghost stories. The kids insisted they'd been funny, but there was a grayness about the rest of the evening. Mary made tea and set the kettle on slow. The radio in the kitchen, the small Philco on top of the icebox, that night made a soft buzz and then played the farm report. I sat with the cup between my hands and couldn't get that man's voice out of my head. The calm way he'd asked, the pause as if searching for the proper answer. The next morning, I walked out to the field in daylight just to see again. The flattened wedge was still there, the stalks lying the same way, like a sheet folded and tucked in. I raked my fingers through the dirt, no prints. The children told the next-door neighbor, Mr. Bailey, who came down with his hat in his hand and frowned at the neatness of it. "You saw nothing?" I asked him. "No," he said slowly. "But old Joe at the mill said his boy came in last night and wouldn't eat. Said he thought someone was standing on his porch watching the stars." Those small things began to pile up. The hens on Mrs. Abernathy's place went silent at dusk for a few nights. The church bell had rung twice and then gone dead once during morning prayers, and the sexton swore he hadn't touched it. My wristwatch, I've had it for years, gained nearly 10 minutes overnight once and then righted itself when I tried to set it. I'm not a man to believe in omens, but you notice if a watch starts to have its own ideas. 3 days after the boys came home, Elsie told me she had seen the man again while she was bringing in the milk pails. She said she was crossing the thin patch of field near the lane, and there he was at the fence, leaning on a post as if he'd been standing there all afternoon. She said he looked right at her and didn't blink. She ran. Her voice slipped, like it might again, and she pressed her small hands over her mouth when she told it. I went out that evening with a better lantern and a neighbor's shotgun in the truck, though I never thought I'd need it. The corn made the same rustle in the wind. The sky had gone to the color of a tin roof. I eased the truck down the path and stopped. At the corner of the field by the ditch, I thought I could see a shape, a pale line between the stalks. But when I stepped out and walked the edge, there was nothing, only the blades and the smell of the earth and my boots scuffing the soil. That night, we left the kitchen light on and the children slept with open doors. I sat in the rocking chair with the lamp low and Roscoe at my feet and listened to the house live. Once, when everything was quiet, I heard a sound outside like the faint ticking of a far-off metronome, a rhythm that didn't belong to the farmhouse. Not a car, not a train, not an animal. It ran for a second and then went away. I told Mary and she said, "Probably some switch, Frank," and she folded the quilt over the children. I wanted to ask more questions, but there was only the small safety of everyday things, dishes, the calendar on the wall, the way the curtains caught the streetlight. A week passed and folks in town began to tell of their own little oddities. Mrs. Klein at the post office said she put a stack of letters on her counter, and when she turned back, one pile had slid to the floor, though no breeze could account for it. Hank from the creamery said his clocks had been wrong all week. One of them had stopped at 4 and refused to start again until he wound it an extra turn. People said the sky had looked odd over the river on Tuesday, a thin, pale band that didn't match any of the maps. They said it like people say, "You might have been out of town," a way to keep distance. I never saw that pale man close again. Once late, I thought I saw someone tall and pale in the hollow down by the old oak, but when I took the lantern and walked the path, the figure had vanished as if it had never been there at all. I asked Simpson at the feed store if he had seen anyone. He shook his head and said he hadn't. Still, when I passed the corner by the field, I found myself holding my breath, steady as if waiting for something to be right. The children got over it. Time does what time does, and their fear turned to dares and then to the business of school. But Tommy still looks toward the corn sometimes when we pass, the way a man looks toward a road he used to drive. Mary says not to let it bother me. I do the chores and I make sure the locks are set, and I keep the lamp by the door at night a little longer than I used to. I'm not telling anyone I know all I think. Folks have enough to mind as it is. Maybe it was a man who lost his way, or some joke. Maybe it was a trick of the light. But when the dusk comes and the fireflies start and our boy wants to stay out late a minute longer, I keep my eye on the corn. Once in a while, I reckon, you learn that some things you can't fit into a neat box, so you fold your hands and go on. I was working third shift security at a mid-rise office building on Euclid Avenue, right near East 9th. Not the nicest building in the world. Mostly insurance offices, a dentist, and some kind of logistics company that always smelled like printer ink. But it was quiet, and the pay was decent enough for what amounted to sitting behind a desk, making rounds twice a night, and buzzing in the occasional janitor or food delivery. That night, it was a Thursday going into Friday, middle of January. Cold like it gets here, real sharp. Snow hadn't come down heavy, but the sidewalks had that thin, crunchy layer. Not enough for a plow, just enough to slip on if you weren't looking where you stepped. Anyway, around 1:15 a.m., I was sitting behind the desk, eating a gas station turkey sandwich and watching one of those old true crime shows with the volume off, subtitles on. Lights were low. Heat was humming. Pretty normal. I glanced up at the security monitor for the front entrance, standard camera angle pointing out toward the street. You could see the glass of the door, the sidewalk, and then across Euclid, the old 5-story parking garage that hadn't been in regular use since the pandemic. Just sat there, mostly empty now, except during games or when people parked for the courthouse. The roof of that garage sits just about even with the 5th floor of my building. I didn't notice it at first, but something caught my eye. A little motion on the roof of the garage, barely there. I figured maybe a bird or a raccoon. But the more I looked, the more I realized it was just sitting there. This dark shape, low to the surface, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall at most. Not big, but it wasn't moving like anything alive either. It just sat there, almost tucked in behind the little concrete guardrail. Could have been a trash bag or a coat, I guess, but something felt wrong, off. Curiosity got the better of me, so I went into the stairwell and climbed up to the 5th floor break room. There's a big window there that looks right across to the garage roof. It was still there, sitting almost center on the roof, about 20 feet back from the edge, black or dark gray. Hard to get a clear shape through the glass, but it wasn't quite square, not round either. Kinda hunched like a crouched person, but a little too still, a little too low. No movement, not even a shiver from wind. I stood there for maybe a minute, waiting for it to twitch or shift or something. Nothing. Then I decided to try my flashlight. I carry one of those big Maglite style ones. Heavy, metal, beam goes a decent distance. I turned off the break room light so the glare wouldn't bounce, cracked the window open, and shined the flashlight across the street. The beam hit it square, and that's when I knew it wasn't any trash bag or bird. The second that light hit it, it reacted. Not fast, not sudden. It didn't jerk or run or flap. It just rose, straight up, like a balloon, but controlled, smooth, almost like it was riding on rails. I stood there completely still, just watching this thing lift, dead quiet, into the sky. It didn't spin or wobble, no rotors, no wings, no thrumming or motor sounds. It just ascended maybe 20, 30 feet above the roof. Then it paused. I swear to God, it stopped midair and tilted just slightly, like it was looking at me. That's the part that really got to me. That tilt, it wasn't much, but something about it felt deliberate. After that, it kept going, slid upward into the low-hanging clouds and disappeared. The whole thing lasted maybe 15 seconds. I stood there for a lot longer than that, trying to make sense of it. I even shined the flashlight around, like maybe I'd see it on another roof or higher up. Nothing. When I went back down to the lobby, the monitor feed for the front door had frozen, like someone had hit pause. I tapped the screen a few times, switched inputs, nothing. Just a still frame of the sidewalk. It stayed that way for close to 20 minutes before flickering back on by itself. Around 2, the janitor for the 3rd floor came in, Maria, and I didn't say anything to her. I didn't really feel like trying to explain what I'd seen. At 3:20, I did my second round. Nothing unusual inside the building, but when I got to the top floor, I went back to that break room window. The garage roof was empty. But here's the part I don't like to think about too much. On the snow covering that garage roof, there were no prints, no marks, just clean, unbroken white. Except for one thing, right in the center where that thing had been, there was a perfect round patch of bare concrete, maybe 3 feet across, like the snow had been melted or pushed away, but no pileup around the edge. Just gone. No dripping, no scatter, no disturbance, just a circle of clean roof. I watched that patch for a long time, maybe 20 minutes, until I started feeling dumb and cold. Nothing else happened that shift, or the next one. 2 days later, the patch was gone. Snow had come again, and it was all covered. I never saw anything like that again, but I did start noticing a few odd things after that. Random power flickers in the cameras, just for a second or two, and never consistent. A hum in the elevator that didn't used to be there, like a high-pitched tone just at the edge of hearing. And sometimes, if I'm being honest, I still glance at that rooftop from the break room. Not because I think it's coming back. I don't know what I think. I just can't stop looking. I was up in Alaska visiting my sister and her husband for a couple weeks last August. They're just outside of Palmer, not too far off the Glen Highway. I'd never been up that far north before, not even close. I'm from around Temple, Texas, born and raised. I'd seen pictures, of course, but being there in person was something else. Everything was bigger, quieter, cleaner. Even the way the air smelled was different. I'd wake up and just stand on their porch for 10, 15 minutes breathing it in like it was medicine. One afternoon, about a week into the trip, my brother-in-law, Jack, asked if I'd help him gather some deadfall out past his neighbor's property. He heats mostly with wood and wanted to get ahead for winter. It'd been rainy the day before, but the sun came out that morning and things were drying up enough to walk the woods without sinking into muck. We headed out a little before 3, him with the chainsaw and me hauling a tarp and a hatchet just in case. The spot was maybe half a mile back from the road, down a little ATV trail through spruce and alder. Ground was soft but manageable, mostly moss and roots. We took our time, stopping here and there to check logs for rot or bugs. About 30 minutes in, we found a good patch, dry, fallen stuff, and got to work. Nothing weird yet. Just birds, wind through the trees, the occasional squirrel cussing us out. It wasn't until we were wrapping up that something felt off. I remember Jack paused while cutting through a decent-sized trunk. He shut the saw off and tilted his head like he was listening. I didn't hear anything right away, just quiet. Then I caught it too, this low humming sound. Not like a plane, not that loud or high-pitched. It was softer, kind of muffled, like it was behind a wall or under the ground, but it was definitely there. It went on for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. Jack looked at me, eyebrows raised. I shrugged. Could have been anything, I figured. Pipeline, maybe a snow machine way off in the distance. We didn't talk about it. 5 minutes later, we started heading back with a tarp full of split logs between us. That's when I saw it. Or I guess I should say, we saw it. We were maybe 20 yards off the trail, walking back the way we came, when I spotted something through the trees. I thought it was metal at first, shiny, curved, sticking up through the brush like a piece of a wrecked plane. I stopped and pointed it out. Jack squinted, dropped the tarp. We walked over, maybe 50, 60 feet through some thick undergrowth. What we found didn't look like any plane crash I've ever seen. The thing was half buried in the ground at an angle, like it had come down and just sunk into the dirt without much of a crater. No scorch marks, no broken trees. It was shaped kind of like a teardrop, or maybe a beetle shell, sleek, smooth, metallic, but dull, almost a charcoal color. No rivets, no seams, no writing. Just one long, curved shape, maybe the size of a pickup. Not huge, but not small either. It didn't smell like fuel or oil. Didn't smell like anything, really. Jack didn't say a word, just stared at it. I walked around to the other side and noticed what looked like a crack or seam running partway down the middle. I didn't touch it. Neither of us did. The weirdest part? There was no sound. The forest went quiet. No birds, no bugs, not even the wind. After a minute or two, I said we needed to report it. Jack nodded, kind of slow, like he wasn't all there. We marked the spot with one of his gloves on a branch and headed back to the house. The whole way out, I kept looking over my shoulder. Jack called the troopers first, who bounced him to the FAA, who bounced him again. Eventually, someone gave him a number for some government agency. I didn't catch the name. And within a couple hours, 2 men showed up at the house in a dark Suburban. No plates. I remember that because Jack pointed it out to me before they pulled in. The guys were dressed like surveyors. Khaki pants, black jackets, no logos. Polite enough, but they didn't introduce themselves or shake hands. Just asked where we'd seen it and if we could take them there. So we did. It was around 7 by then. Still light out, just starting to turn golden. We hiked back in, same route, same trail. Took about 20 minutes. I was nervous, heart thumping the whole way. Not scared exactly, just off. We got to the spot where we'd marked the tree with the glove. It was gone. No metal, no shape, not even a dent in the ground where it had been. Just a patch of moss and leaves like nothing had ever been there. The branch we'd left the glove on was snapped clean off and lying on the ground. I stood there, just staring. Jack didn't say anything. One of the government guys walked the area with a little device in his hand that looked like a radio or scanner. No beeping, no reaction, just him sweeping back and forth like he was doing a job he didn't care about. The other guy asked us again to describe what we saw. Jack did most of the talking. I chimed in here and there. They didn't react, just nodded, jotted notes on a little pad. Never once looked surprised. After a few more minutes, they thanked us, turned around, and left. Didn't ask for photos, though we didn't have any, and didn't take our names. Jack followed them back out. I lingered for a second longer. There was something strange about the ground. Not dug up, not trampled, but the moss where the thing had been, it was flat, like something heavy had sat there. And there were these faint streaks in the dirt, like someone had brushed the forest floor smooth. That night I didn't sleep well. Neither did Jack. We didn't talk about it much after. I think it rattled him worse than he let on. A couple days later, I flew back to Texas. Before I left, I asked him if he'd gone back out there. He shook his head and said, "No point." Then he told me the trail was blocked now. Somebody had put up a no trespassing sign just past his neighbor's lot. Fresh barbed wire, too. Said it wasn't there before. He didn't want to push it. Can't blame him. I know what I saw. We both saw it. But whatever it was, someone got there fast, and they made sure it disappeared without a trace. I was working the overnight shift at the weather station out by the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. My name's Jordan Mills, and I've been with the National Weather Service for about 5 years now, mostly doing remote monitoring and radar operations from small outposts like this one. This particular station sits on a ridge about 10 miles east of the mountain range itself, pretty isolated. Closest town is over an hour away, and the kind of place where if something weird happens, you're the only one around to see it. That night, it was late April, maybe around 10 p.m., and I was running my usual scan on the Doppler radar. The job is mostly routine, checking for precipitation, wind patterns, that kind of thing. But a few hours earlier, I'd noticed something strange on the screen. There was this huge stationary mass hovering over the northern part of the Sangre de Cristo Range. At first, I figured it had to be a glitch or some sort of interference, but I kept watching. It wasn't moving, and it wasn't weather. No rain, no snow, just a dense, well-defined shape sitting there. I couldn't tell if it was cloud or something else. I tried adjusting the frequency and recalibrating the radar, but the shape stayed consistent, sharp-edged. It was unlike any formation I'd ever seen, Mike, and I've tracked everything from thunderstorms to dust devils in my time. It covered an area at least 5 miles across, too big to be a plane or bird flock, and it wasn't on any satellite images. Around midnight, the station's old landline phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. Calls this late were usually from dispatch or maintenance, but something about the ringing made me pick up. A man's voice came through, low and calm. "We need to come by your station. It's regarding the equipment." I asked who was calling, but the line went dead before he answered. No caller ID, no trace. I shrugged it off and went back to the radar feed, but I was uneasy. The thing on the screen hadn't changed at all. Around 1:30 a.m., there was a knock at the station's front door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and no visitors were allowed without clearance. I checked the security cameras. 2 men were standing outside. Both looked similar, tall, mid-40s maybe, wearing identical black coats that looked too clean for a mountain outpost. Their hair was slicked back, and their expressions were unreadable. I hesitated, but opened the door a crack. "Good evening," one said evenly. "We're here to calibrate your radar." I told them I wasn't authorized to let anyone in, especially at this hour, but they showed some kind of badge. I couldn't make out the details, but it looked official. No logo I recognized, just an embossed seal. They didn't say much after that. I let them inside because arguing in the middle of nowhere felt pointless, especially when they seemed prepared to do this quickly. They moved straight to the radar console and started pressing buttons. I watched, trying to keep track of everything they did. It didn't look like standard calibration to me. They typed in sequences I didn't know, adjusted frequencies, and rerouted the data. They stayed quiet, except for the soft hum of the equipment. After about 20 minutes, they finished and packed up without a word. They gave me a nod, then left just like they came. No small talk, no questions. I locked the door behind them and tried to check the radar again. The huge stationary mass was gone. The rest of the night passed without incident, but something felt off. The air inside the station was stale, and the screens flickered a bit. I checked the system logs to see what they'd changed. That's when I realized the logs from the past 8 hours were missing, not deleted, just gone. The system acted like the data never existed. I double-checked the backup drives. Empty. Empty. I asked dispatch if they had records. They did, but nothing showed up for our station's radar during that time. When I called my supervisor the next morning to report what happened, he acted confused. Said no one authorized anyone to enter the station, and no one had seen any visitors on security feeds. I told him I'd seen them with my own eyes, but he told me to document it and move on. Later that day, I drove to town and grabbed coffee at the diner, trying to shake off the feeling. I mentioned the missing logs to a couple locals, but none had noticed anything unusual in the sky or around the mountains. I kept watching the radar after that night. No sign of the shape reappearing. The equipment worked fine, except for the missing logs. Sometimes late at night, I still check the skies toward the Sangre de Cristo range. The radar never shows anything like that again. But every once in a while, when the wind is calm and the air feels thick, I swear I hear that low hum again, like the station itself is remembering. I set up camp near the edge of Echo Lake just before sunset. The mountains around were already cold and quiet, even though it was early September. I'd been hiking all day, and the idea was simple. Sleep under the stars, fish a bit, and maybe get some rest before heading back the next morning. The air was crisp, and there was a thin fog curling over the water as the sun dipped below the ridge. I was alone. No one else was around. The nearest trailhead was miles away, and the small campsite had that isolated vibe that made you feel like you were the last person on Earth. I liked it that way. After dinner, I sat on a rock by the shore, skipping stones and watching the water ripple. The lake was calm, almost glassy, reflecting the darkening sky. My watch caught the last bits of light, an old Seiko I'd had for years, the kind that ticks and has a faint glow on the hands. Nothing fancy, but I trusted it. Around midnight, I was still awake, bundled in my jacket, staring at the stars. That's when I noticed it, a faint glow under the water, just beneath the surface. At first, I thought it was some kind of reflection or maybe a fishing lure left behind by another camper, but the light pulsed like a heartbeat. It wasn't bright, just enough to stand out in the dark lake. I called out, "Hello?" but there was no reply. The glow didn't move or flicker randomly. It was steady, slow pulses, maybe every 2 or 3 seconds, weirdly hypnotic. I stood up and tested the water with my foot. Cold, as expected. The glow stayed in the same spot, maybe 20 feet out from shore, about chest deep. I looked around. No boats, no fishermen, no signs of anyone else nearby. Curiosity got the better of me. I figured I'd swim out and check it. I didn't bring a flashlight, but the moon was bright enough to see the outlines of the trees on the far side. I shrugged off my jacket, and stepped in. The water was icy. I waded out, feeling the soft mud underfoot give way to rockier ground. The glow pulsed steadily, a bluish-white color that was eerily beautiful. When I reached the spot, the light seemed to be coming from just beneath the surface, maybe a foot down. I dove under. The cold hit me hard, and for a moment I lost my bearings. But when I opened my eyes, I didn't see the glow anymore. The water was just dark, empty. No fish, no glowing object, no source. I surfaced and gasped for air, looking around. The glow had vanished completely. I tapped my wrist to check my watch. The second hand was frozen, stuck between the 9 and 10. I tried winding it, shaking it, but nothing. It was dead. I blinked, feeling a sudden wave of unease, like something was off, but I couldn't say what. I climbed out, wrapping myself in my jacket, rubbing my arms to warm up. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. I wasn't expecting any here, but something about the silence felt different, like the night had gone from peaceful to watching. I sat back down on the rock, shivering more from the feeling than the cold. The lake was still again. No glow, no sound except for distant wind through the pines. I tried to shrug off the weirdness, telling myself it was probably some natural thing, a bioluminescent algae maybe, or a fishing lure with a light that died when I dove in. But then I noticed something else. My legs felt numb. I looked down and my skin was covered in tiny, faintly glowing dots, almost like the bioluminescence had stuck to me. They didn't hurt, but the sight made me uneasy. I rubbed them off, but more appeared. I felt a chill run up my spine. I tried to stand, but my legs wobbled like jelly. The numbness was spreading. I sat back down, heart pounding. That's when I noticed the sky. It wasn't the same sky I'd looked at before. The stars had shifted, like the whole night had jumped forward or changed. I checked my watch again. Still dead. I pulled out my phone to check the time. It said 3:14 a.m., but I had no idea how long I'd been out there. The battery was low, but it still worked. I tried to get up and walk back to camp, but I kept stumbling. It was like my body wasn't responding right. The numbness was creeping higher. I sat on the ground and tried to stay calm, breathing slowly. Then I heard a faint humming, low and steady, coming from beneath the lake. I looked toward the water, the surface rippling slightly as if something moved under it. The moonlight shimmered on the ripples, but no more glow. The humming got louder, but it wasn't harsh or scary. It felt almost soothing, like a strange lullaby. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them, the numbness was gone. My limbs felt normal again. I stood up feeling disoriented but stable. The lake was silent, no humming, no glow. I decided to pack up and leave. I felt tired, like I hadn't slept in days. I gathered my gear and started the hike back toward the trailhead. The sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. When I reached my car, I pulled out my phone and tried to call my wife, Sarah. She picked up on the first ring. "Where have you been?" she asked, voice shaking. I'm not sure," I said. She told me she'd been worried sick. I realized then that I couldn't remember what had happened after I went to bed 2 nights ago. The last clear memory I had was setting up camp. I checked my watch again. It was still stopped. Later, at home, I looked at my arms in the bathroom mirror. There were no glowing dots, no marks at all, but a faint redness lingered where the numbness had been. I still don't know what the light was beneath the lake or why my watch stopped working. The whole thing feels like a strange dream I can't fully wake up from. Sometimes when I'm near water at night, I swear I hear that low hum again, just beneath the surface. I was having my first cup of coffee out on the back porch when I saw the trees move. It was nearly 5 a.m., late April, and a damp fog had rolled in overnight. I'd woken up early to check on the generator. Spring storms can knock out power, and decided to sit outside for a bit before daybreak. The air was cool, almost chilly, but I didn't notice any breeze. Not a whisper of wind, not a rustle in the underbrush. Then I saw the poplar in the northwest corner tip over, just enough for me to catch it in the corner of my eye. I thought it was my imagination, or maybe an animal brushing against the trunk. But the second poplar swayed, then the birch behind it, and oddest of all, the wild apple near the fence line bent forward, then back, in perfect unison. I set my mug down and leaned forward on the railing. Fog curled around the rail posts, pooling in the yard, but no wind stirred it. I watched the line of trees for a full minute, thinking maybe a deer herd was crashing through undergrowth, but the leaves only quivered, no branches cracked, no deer leapt. I stood up, heart thumping. The generator was a quarter-mile away, down by the road, so there was no moving machinery to kick up a breeze. The fog was holding still, thick enough to dampen sound. I heard my own breathing, and nothing else. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped off the porch, my boots making soft clicks on the wood. I scanned the yard, empty. Then I walked down the steps and paused at the edge of the grass. The trees were still bending, now reaching almost 10 degrees to the south, then righting themselves, over and over, like a silent wave running through the row. My flashlight beam cut through the fog. All around, the yard was mine alone. Mowed grass, flower beds, the old metal swing set that squeaked only if you pushed it. Tonight it was motionless. Only the trees moved. I took 3 slow steps forward and swept the light across the field beyond. The pasture was half flooded this time of year, reeds and cattails poking out, reflections of the porch light rippling in shallow water. I stayed at the fence line, hands tight in my pockets, my breath fogging out in a little cloud. That's when I saw it, just past the orchard, hovering maybe 40 feet above the ground. A matte black shape against the gray sky, perfectly still. It was squat, like a flattened oval, maybe 30 feet across. No lights, no seams, nothing that looked mechanical, just a silhouette with smooth edges. I swallowed and steadied the flashlight. I clicked it off. Total darkness, but I could still make out the shape. It wasn't glowing, only darker than the fog behind it, like a hole in the mist. I closed my eyes for a second and opened them again. Same spot. I stepped off the grass into the wet soil, boots sinking a bit, and held the beam at waist level. The flashlight caught no detail, just a matte finish that absorbed the beam. No reflection. I called out, "Hello?" but my voice was swallowed by the fog. My own echo, distant. The shape didn't move. The trees continued their silent sway behind me, but this thing was rigid, anchored in place. I felt the hair on my arms rise, and I forced my legs not to shake. My logical brain flickered on, maybe a clump of low cloud hanging there, or a weather balloon caught on currents. But it was too solid looking, too defined, no wisps or drips. I pointed the flashlight down at the grass, then back up. It was still there. I raised my hand and wiped condensation off the beam lens. Still there. I backed up 2 steps, and the shape stayed the same size, the same height. No perspective change. It hung like it was following me, but I didn't feel followed. I felt watched. Then as I looked, it jerked upward. Not climbed or drifted, shot straight up. The world went quiet for a moment, then I heard it. A low hum, like distant machinery warming up, growing louder and lower in pitch as the shape rose. In 2 seconds, it was gone, just a blank curtain of fog and sky where it had been. The trees stopped moving immediately. The wind, or whatever motion had been running through them, cut out. Total stillness. I stood there blinking. The fog thinned a bit in the first light, like showing distant hills, ordinary farm buildings. My flashlight beam swung back to the spot, revealing only branches, dew, damp earth. No scorch marks, no swirling mist, no disturbance beyond a slight indentation in the reeds where I'd stood. I turned and sprinted back to the porch, boots slapping the boards, pulled the door shut, double-checked the deadbolt. Inside, I flicked on every light. Kitchen, living room, bedroom, hallway. The house felt too bright and too small. My heart wouldn't slow. I stared out each window at the yard, expecting to see the shape reappear, but the trees stood motionless, the fog retreating toward the woods. I tried the TV, radio, my phone. No news, no weather alerts, no missed calls. My neighbor's light was off. No chance he'd seen anything. I could still hear the soft hum in my ears, like a tuning fork vibrating somewhere in my skull. I made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around the mug. Dawn was breaking, pale and pink. The fog bank lifted enough to show stable rows of poplars and birches, the orchard's budding buds, the swing set's chipped paint. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't believe it. Over the next hour, I kept glancing out the windows. At first light, the yard looked peaceful, familiar. Then I saw it. A 5-foot patch of ground beneath where the shape had hovered. Grass flattened flat, reeds bent in a perfect circle around it. Not scorched or burned, just pressed into the mud. Like someone had pressed a giant cookie cutter straight down, then lifted it. I grabbed my coat and flashlight and hurried outside to mark it. The circle was roughly 15 feet across, clear outline, no footprints in it. I kicked at the edge with my boot. Soil was damp but not waterlogged, tufts of grass sprouting sideways. No sign of digging. It was exactly level with the rest of the field. I stood there for a long moment, flashlight dangling. The morning air felt different, thinner in my chest. I turned and walked back to the porch, leaving the circle untouched. I didn't tell anyone until much later. I mowed the lawn that afternoon, trimmed branches, dead-headed flowers. Routine work to make the yard look no different than before. At dusk, I sat on the porch again, coffee in hand, rain clouds gathering over the ridge. I watched the wind pick up, hearing the leaves tremble, feeling the world tilt back to normal. But every now and then I think of that black oval slipping upward, of the trees swaying with invisible fingers, of the circle pressed into the grass. And I wonder if next time I step out at dawn, I'll see something hovering just beyond the fence, waiting for the world to still itself again. The storm came out of nowhere, like it had been waiting until the last second to remind us who was really in charge around here. It was late summer, early September, and the kind of heavy rain that slams the windows and shakes the trees. I was home with my family, my wife Claire, our daughter Lila, and our golden retriever Hobbs. We live on the edge of Pine Ridge, which is just a few miles outside of the city but surrounded by thick woods. It's quiet out here, mostly dark after sundown, and storms can get really intense with how the wind funnels through the trees. The power cut out maybe 20 minutes after the first thunder hit. It was the kind of blackout that felt like the whole neighborhood just blinked out at once. 1 second, the lights were on, the TV was playing some stupid cooking show, and the next, everything went black, except for the flash of lightning outside. Claire lit some candles, and we gathered in the living room. Hobbs immediately laid down next to Lila, who was clutching her favorite stuffed bear. She was maybe 7 at the time, scared of the thunder like most kids. I sat by the window watching the rain hammer down on the yard. The wind made the old pines groan and bend low. At some point, the power kicked back on. It wasn't gradual, just a quick snap, and the lights flickered back to life. We all sighed, relieved, but then Claire said something that made me freeze. "Did you see the security cameras?" I hadn't thought to check. We'd set up a basic home security system a few months before, mostly because we live so close to the woods and sometimes deer or raccoons come close enough to set off the motion detectors. The footage is stored on a little DVR box in the laundry room. When I went to check it, I found the video files from the blackout period were all scrambled, just static and glitchy colors like the signal was broken or corrupted. But there was one frame, just one, frozen in the middle of all the noise. It was weird. Grainy infrared footage that showed the edge of the tree line behind our backyard. And there, just standing in the shadows, was a silhouette. I couldn't make out much. It wasn't a person in any clear sense. It was tall, maybe 6 feet, but the shape was a little off. Slim, but somehow not quite human. The strangest part was the eyes. 2 bright points of light reflecting back, like you see in a dog or a cat at night. But these eyes were still, just staring back from the dark edge of the trees. I watched that frame over and over, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. The rest of the video was unusable, like the system had been jammed or overwhelmed somehow. That night, I kept checking the backyard through the window, but all I could see were the usual shadows cast by the storm-battered trees. Hobbs growled low once or twice, but didn't rush to the door or try to go outside. Claire was quiet, not her usual chatter. Lila just hugged her bear and eventually fell asleep. The next day, we went out to check the yard. The rain had washed away any tracks, and nothing seemed out of place. No broken branches, no disturbed grass, no footprints leading to or from the tree line. It was like nothing had been there at all. I asked some neighbors if they'd noticed anything strange during the storm, but everyone was mostly just talking about the weather and the power outage. No one mentioned lights or noises or anything weird. It felt like I was the only one who saw something. I kept thinking about that single frame. What was it? A person with some kind of night vision gear? An animal? Something else? The eyes reflected light in a way that didn't match any animal I know around here. No deer, no coyote, no raccoon. And the shape wasn't right either. A few nights later, I stayed up late again, scanning the yard with a flashlight and watching the tree line. Hobbs was restless, pacing near the door. I thought I caught a flicker of movement just at the edge of the woods, but when I shone the light, nothing was there. The weirdest part was the silence. Usually at night, the forest is full of sounds. Crickets, frogs, the wind through the leaves. But that night, it was dead quiet, like the world held its breath. I don't know why we didn't call the cops or anyone else. Maybe because there was no proof, just a weird image on a camera no one else could see. Maybe because I didn't want to believe it was something that didn't have a simple explanation. Claire suggested maybe it was just some glitch, something caused by the storm messing with the cameras. But the way the eyes looked, like they were watching us, made me uneasy. Eventually, things went back to normal. The power stayed on, the cameras worked again. Hobbs stopped growling at night, but sometimes when the wind is right and the trees grown low outside, I find myself staring at the dark edge of the yard, wondering if whatever was there that night is still watching. I was driving through Nevada on that run, hauling freight from Reno down toward Phoenix. The route took me close to the edges of the desert where the mesas rise up, just past the more official roads near Area 51. I'd done that stretch dozens of times, mostly at night or early morning, but that day was different. It was early June, late afternoon, and the heat was still sticking to the cab of my truck. I remember watching the sun dip low, casting long shadows over the rocky formations that line the highway. The air was dry with a slight wind kicking up dust now and then. Nothing unusual, really, just the same open road I'd been on before. I was rolling along, listening to some country on the radio, when I saw the convoy ahead. At first, I thought it was one of those military convoys you sometimes catch sight of in this part of the country. About 10 trucks, big rigs, and smaller armored vehicles, all lined up in a row on the highway shoulder. Usually when I see those, they keep moving. But these weren't. They were all stopped, engines off, no movement, just sitting there like statues. I slowed down to get a better look, figuring maybe there was some kind of accident or checkpoint. But there was no roadblock, no flashing lights, no officers standing around. Just the trucks, all lined up perfectly. The drivers and passengers were outside, standing in small groups, just looking at something off to the side, beyond the edge of the road. That's when I saw it. A massive orb hanging between two mesas maybe 100 yards off the highway. It was huge, way bigger than any helicopter or drone I'd ever seen. The surface wasn't smooth or metallic. It almost looked like a dull pearl, glowing faintly from inside. It pulsed with this soft, steady light, like the whole thing was breathing quietly. The color shifted slowly between pale blue and faint amber. There was no noise, no engine, no hum, nothing. The desert was still except for the wind and the faint rustle of scrub brush. The men standing near their trucks didn't move, didn't talk. They just stared, completely frozen, like the orb had silenced them. I caught my breath. Something about the scene felt completely unreal. I looked down at my dashboard to make sure I wasn't seeing things, but everything was normal. The radio was static but no interference. The gauges steady. I didn't want to get too close, so I kept my distance but rolled the window down to listen. No sound came from the orb. I thought maybe it was a trick of light or some kind of training exercise, but nothing about it made sense. No other vehicles on the highway, no signs of people moving around except those frozen guys. After what felt like several minutes, the orb started to rise slowly between the mesas. As it lifted, the pulsing light dimmed, and the men near the trucks seemed to snap out of it. They shifted, moved, like waking from a trance. Engines started up, and the convoy began to roll again, exactly as if nothing had happened. I stayed behind, staring at where the orb had been until it was completely gone, leaving only the desert and the fading sun. When I finally pulled back onto the highway and got going again, it was like the whole thing was wiped clean from the world. No emergency crews arrived, no traffic on the radio mentioned anything. Even when I stopped at a gas station a few miles later, the clerk looked at me like I was crazy when I asked about a military convoy stopping. I checked my watch, too. An hour had passed, but it felt like 5 or 10 minutes at most. The light faded quickly as night fell, and I kept thinking I should call someone, but the words wouldn't come. That night, parked in a motel near Beatty, I stared out the window at the stars. The desert felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Roscoe, my dog, usually restless in new places, was unusually calm beside me. I kept looking for lights on the horizon, or some sign the orb was back. Nothing came. The next morning, the convoy was nowhere to be seen, no tracks or signs on the road. It was just me, Roscoe, and the empty desert stretching out like it always had. I don't know what I saw out there between those mesas. Maybe it was a military experiment, some kind of new maybe something else. But whatever it was, it wasn't just a truck convoy stopping for a break. There was a weight to that moment, a silence that felt deliberate, like the desert had been waiting for something none of us were supposed to notice. And for the rest of that trip, I kept looking over my shoulder, wondering if I was being watched, or if whatever it was still out there just beyond the edge of the road. I don't know how to explain this right, but I'm going to tell it like it happened because I'm still not sure what to make of it. It started one morning last October when I was out fishing on Clearview Lake. That's a small, quiet spot in northern Minnesota. Not much around it except woods and a few cabins scattered here and there. I've been fishing there since I was a kid, and I know that lake pretty well. I was out early, just before dawn, rowing my old aluminum boat. The water was glassy calm, and there was this thick fog rolling in, kind of sticking close to the surface. The kind of morning where everything feels muted, like you're in a dream. I had my fishing gear and my GPS mounted near the bow, a little handheld Garmin I use to mark good spots and make sure I don't get turned around in the fog. I'd been out maybe an hour, drifting toward my favorite spot near the northwest shore, when my GPS started acting weird. The screen flickered and then zoomed in on a little island that I'd never heard of. It showed up as a perfect circle, maybe 200 feet across, right in the middle of the lake. I thought it was a glitch at first. Clearview doesn't have any islands that I know of. I checked the map on the GPS, and this island wasn't there at all. I even pulled out my phone and looked it up on Google Maps once I had service later, but no island anywhere near that spot. Curious, I rowed toward the spot. The fog was thick, making it hard to see more than a few dozen feet ahead. The GPS kept the island marked as I moved closer, but the lake looked just like always. Flat water, no sign of land or any shape breaking the surface. I circled the area for a while, watching the GPS. The island was exactly where the device said it was, perfectly round and still on the screen. I kept expecting to see something, rocks, logs, debris, but there was nothing. At one point, I swear I thought I saw a dark shape just beneath the surface, but every time I looked closer, it vanished. Maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks with the fog. The strangest part was the GPS itself. As I got closer to the spot, the device started glitching more. The screen froze a couple of times, and then when it caught up, the island was gone. Just gone. The map was back to normal, showing open water. I sat back in the boat, rubbing my eyes, feeling dumb. I was about to call it a weird glitch and head home when my radio crackled with static. I carry a small marine VHF radio for emergencies, but no one usually uses channel 16 on Clearview. The static wasn't loud or continuous, more like a quiet hiss with faint, almost rhythmic pulses underneath. I fiddled with the knobs, trying to clear it, but it didn't go away. It was nothing like normal interference. It almost felt like the radio was picking up something deliberate, but I had no idea what. I didn't say anything over the radio. There was no voice or anything, just that weird static with a pattern I couldn't figure out. It went on for about 5 minutes, then suddenly stopped. That's when I noticed the fog had gotten even thicker. The air was cold and still, and the lake felt heavier somehow. Like it wasn't just water anymore. I checked the GPS again. It was acting normally, no sign of the island or any glitches. I started rowing back to the dock, but the fog was so dense I could barely see the shoreline I knew was right there. I kept my eyes on the GPS to make sure I wasn't drifting, but it suddenly flashed again. This time, the island reappeared. Same perfect circle, same exact spot. But something was different. There was a faint outline inside the island, like a shadow. I blinked and it disappeared. I told myself to calm down, that I was tired and seeing things. When I finally made it back to shore, I hooked my boat up and packed my gear in silence. The fog was still thick over the lake, but the island on the GPS was gone again. At home, I tried to look into it more. I checked every map I could find online. No island, no mention of anything unusual in that part of Clearview Lake. I called the local ranger station just to see if they'd heard of any new formations or changes. They sounded confused and said the lake hadn't changed in decades. The next morning, I went back to the lake, hoping to catch the island on the GPS again, but it didn't show up at all, no matter where I went. That afternoon, I pulled up the GPS data from the previous day. The track logs were mostly normal, except for the spots where the island appeared. The coordinates matched the exact same place in the lake every time, but the weirdest thing was the GPS timestamps around those spots. They were off by a few minutes, like the device had jumped forward and then back, almost like a hiccup in time. I'm not someone who believes in crazy stuff, but the whole thing was unsettling. I kept telling myself it was some sort of software glitch or maybe an error with the satellite signal, but the radio, the fog, the time glitches, it didn't add up. A couple days later, I was talking to an old friend, Marv. He's lived near the lake for years and fishes there too. I told him about the island on the GPS and the weird radio noises. He paused, then something that stuck with me. "There's a spot out there," he said, "where compasses spin funny and electronics just act up. Some people call it the stillwater circle. Nobody can explain it, but it's been on the lake for a long time. Boats avoid it." I asked why. He just shrugged and said, "Old stories, strange happenings. Folks say it's like something doesn't want you to see it." I went back out the next night, this time with Marv's old compass and a backup GPS. The fog was rolling in again, thick and cold. We cruised slowly toward where the island had shown up before. The compass needle started to twitch as we approached, swinging wildly, refusing to settle. My GPS froze up again. The backup device did the same. The radio crackled softly, and I could swear I heard the faint rhythm again under the static. We slowed the boat and just waited. The lake was completely still except for the sound of our motors idling. After a while, the fog thinned a little and the compass stopped spinning. I looked down and the water around the boat was darker, like the lake floor was dipping deeper right there. We didn't see any island. Marv told me quietly, "Sometimes you gotta know when to leave the water alone." We headed back, and the devices returned to normal. Since then, I've stayed away from that exact spot. I still fish the lake, but never near the stillwater circle, if that's what it's called. I'm not sure what I saw or didn't see. Maybe it was a glitch, a trick of the fog, or something deeper. The radio static, the compass, the time skips, they're real enough to me. I just know there's something in that part of Clearview Lake that doesn't want to be found. We were up at the cabin in late March. Still cold at night, snow lingering in the shaded parts of the ridge, but clear skies and dry roads made it manageable. My wife, Jeanette, had been asking to get up there before summer. She likes it best when it's still too cold for the tourists to come poking around. Just us and the mountains. No cell service, no neighbors. Closest occupied house is nearly 3 miles down the gravel. We built the place back in '91. Nothing fancy. Single story with a covered porch, small wood stove, solar setup for lights. No TV, no internet. We bring books and a deck of cards. Jeanette likes her jigsaw puzzles. I do the cooking. We're both 70 now. Been retired a while. It was a Monday evening, I think, around 8:45. We just finished eating lentil soup and cornbread, and I stepped out to the porch with a mug of hot cider to listen for owls. I'm used to the sounds up there, wind through the trees like occasional coyote yipping down the slope. But it was real still that night. No breeze, no bugs. Moon not up yet, but the stars were bright. I leaned against the railing and scanned the sky like I always do. You get a view straight across the next ridge, miles of tree line, and that's when I saw them. 3 lights, small, pale yellow, moving west to east across the sky just above the mountain line. They were in a triangle, not a perfect one, more like a scalene, and they kept that shape steady as they moved. Not fast, not slow, just smooth, no sound at all. At first I figured they were planes, but there were no strobes, no blinking, no color change, and they weren't in a flight path I'd ever seen. We get commercial airliners sometimes, way higher up, heading toward Denver. You can hear the rumble long before you see the lights. These didn't make a sound. I went back in and called Jeanette to come look. It didn't play. She grabbed her fleece and followed me out. By then, the lights had moved farther east, but they were still visible, still in formation. We both watched them until they slipped behind the eastern ridge. Took maybe 4 or 5 minutes total. Jeanette didn't say much, just asked if I'd ever seen anything like that before. I hadn't. Not quite like that. We stayed out another 10 minutes, but nothing else happened, so we went back inside. That should have been the end of it. But around 1:30 a.m., something woke me up. I couldn't say what exactly. No bang or crash, just the sense that something had changed. The cabin was dead silent, and Jeanette was still asleep beside me. I got up, pulled on my boots, and opened the front door. The porch was cold. My breath fogged. I stood there, letting my eyes adjust, and then I saw them again. Same 3 lights, same shape. But they weren't in the sky this time. They were lower, maybe just above the tree line across the narrow valley. I know how far those trees are. I could hike it in about 40 minutes. The lights were just hovering above the pines, not moving, not swaying. I watched them for a long time, 10 minutes, maybe longer. They didn't drift or change, just hung there. Then one of them started to dim, not flicker, dim, faded down to nothing over about 30 seconds. The other 2 stayed put. Jeanette came out in her robe and stood next to me. She'd woken up and saw I wasn't in bed. We stood there together in the cold, watching those 2 remaining lights. They didn't move. Then the second one dimmed, same as the first. That left just 1. It stayed there for what felt like forever. I remember because I started to feel the cold in my fingers, but I didn't want to go inside. Then that last light did something different. It blinked. Once. A slow, pulsing kind of blink. Not sharp, just a gradual fade out and back in. Then it slid sideways, maybe 50 feet to the right, and stopped. Then it blinked again, and after a few seconds, it dimmed out completely. We stood there another 20 minutes, just in case. But that was it. The next morning, I checked the snow on the ridges with my binoculars. No tracks. Nothing disturbed. We didn't talk about it much. We had coffee, did the crossword like usual. That afternoon, I walked down to the base of the ridge. It took the narrow game trail up to where I thought the lights had been. No signs of anything, no burn marks, no flattened brush, nothing. Nothing. We stayed the rest of the week, didn't see the lights again. But every night before bed, we stepped onto the porch and looked out at the ridge. And every night, the forest felt too quiet. I was on the night shift at the Cedar Ridge Observatory, a small but pretty important research station nestled up in the Cascades. My job was mostly monitoring the telescopes, checking the data streams, and making sure everything ran smoothly while the big brains slept. It was a quiet gig, mostly paperwork and occasional troubleshooting, perfect for someone who likes peace and hates crowds. The place sits on a ridge, miles from the nearest town, with nothing but trees and sky around. The nights out there are always dark, the kind of dark that lets you see every star in the sky if it's clear. This one night, the sky was crystal clear, no clouds, no haze. I remember that because it was unusual for spring, and the astronomers were excited about a particular set of observations. We had 4 telescopes online, each pointed at different parts of the sky. I was keeping an eye on the logs, running diagnostics, and jotting down notes when something odd happened. At around 1:15 a.m., the signal from telescope 3 just dropped. No warning, no error messages, nothing. The monitor went blank like the feed was cut off. I hit the reset button and tried to reconnect, but nothing worked. The connection just wasn't there. What creeped me out more was the last image captured before the blackout. It showed this blurry, shifting shape covering nearly half of the field of view, blotting out the stars. The blur was smeared like something moving really fast right in front of the lens. But there shouldn't have been anything near the telescope physically. It's housed in a locked dome, and the dome's security alarm was silent. I double-checked the security footage for the last 2 hours. No one approached the building, no weird shadows, no animals messing with the equipment. Everything was normal. The cameras caught the usual raccoons scurrying by hours before, but nothing near the dome at the time the signal dropped. I called my coworker, Dana, who was in the next building. She wasn't on shift, but lives in the small cabin on the property and sometimes drops in at night. She said she didn't hear or see anything unusual. The place was too quiet. I sat back in my chair, staring at the frozen screen. I felt this chill creeping up my spine, even though the room was warm. I tried to shake it off. Then the power flickered, just for a second, enough to make all the monitors blink off and on. Nothing else seemed affected, just the observatory's equipment. I went outside for some fresh air. The night was so still, it felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. I looked up. The stars were bright, endless, but in one patch above the ridge, they seemed slightly dimmer, like a faint shadow crossing the sky. I blinked, and it was gone. Jasper, my border collie mix, who was resting in the kennel nearby, perked his ears and started growling low and quiet. He's usually calm at night, but something unsettled him. I walked down the path to check the power box. Everything looked normal. No blown fuses, no unusual readings. The blinking stopped. Back inside, I tried reconnecting to telescope 3 again. The feed remained dead. Then, the strange thing happened. My phone buzzed with a notification, an incoming text from an unknown number. I opened it. It was just a single word. Look. I checked outside again. The forest was still. Jasper was quiet now, but watching me closely. I didn't reply. I turned on the TV, tried to distract myself. Nothing on the news or weather report mentioned anything strange. Later, at 3 a.m., I heard a soft hum coming from the direction of Telescope 3's dome. Like a low vibration, almost mechanical, but steady and constant. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out, Jasper following. The dome was locked tight. No way anyone got in. The hum stopped when I got close. I checked the camera feed one last time and noticed the blurry shape on the last image wasn't random motion. It had a shape, elongated, almost organic, like a shadow cast by something moving just out of focus. I spent the rest of the night sitting there, half watching the sky, half watching the screens. No more blurs, no more signals lost, but the feeling lingered, like something had brushed past the edge of everything I knew. I packed up at dawn and drove home through the empty mountain roads. Jasper was quiet in the back seat. The next day, the observatory replaced the telescope's camera, but they never found what caused the blackout. I still don't know what the blur was, or why the power flickered, or why I got that text. But every time I look up at the stars now, a part of me wonders, what else is out there, just out of sight? I set up the camera trap deep in the woods, just like I always do, near a creek bend where deer and foxes usually come to drink. It was late October, the kind of damp, gray afternoon that makes the forest smell like wet earth and fallen leaves. I'd been working on this wildlife photography project for months, mostly by myself, lugging gear through mud and over roots, waiting for something worth shooting. My dog Pippa, a lean border collie mix with sharp eyes and a quiet nature, came along most days. She's good company and doesn't scare the animals off. I didn't expect anything weird that afternoon. Just the usual quiet and the occasional rustle of squirrels or birds. I was aiming to catch a few shots of the bucks that come through just before dusk. The spot I picked was perfect. Thick brush on one side, a clearing on the other, and enough cover to hide the camera without disturbing anything. I placed the camera on a sturdy branch about 5 feet off the ground, angled toward the creek where I'd seen tracks a few days before. I tested the motion sensor, packed up, and told Pippa we were heading back. It was chilly, and the sky was heavy with low clouds that promised rain later. I didn't bother with the big lens today, just the camera trap and my usual backpack with essentials. A week later, I went back to check the footage. This part of the forest is quiet. No one's really around except the occasional hiker or hunter, but mostly it's just the animals. The path to the creek is narrow and overgrown, so I moved carefully to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. I found the camera exactly where I left it, still securely fastened. Pippa sniffed around but didn't seem bothered. I pulled out the SD card and popped it into my laptop as soon as I got home. The first few frames were what I expected: squirrels, rabbits, a fox slipping through the brush, a family of deer drinking at the creek. Then, about halfway through the footage, things got odd. There were 5 frames out of hundreds that were corrupted. The image was mostly static, with blocks of digital noise. The camera had clearly been triggered by something, but the picture wouldn't load properly. At first, I thought it was just a glitch. Maybe the card was damaged, but the weird part was the timing. The corrupted frames were all within a couple seconds, right in the middle of the video and right where the creek is visible. I zoomed in and enhanced the static as much as I could. The edges of a figure showed through, tall and thin, standing upright among the trees. The shape was vaguely humanoid, but blurred, like the camera couldn't quite capture it. It wasn't like any animal or person I'd ever seen on the trail. I showed the frames to a friend who's into photography and digital editing. He said sometimes cameras mess up when something reflects light oddly or moves too fast, but he admitted this was unusual, especially since the rest of the footage was clean. I went back to the spot the next day, Pippa and I walking the trail slowly. I tried to imagine what could have caused those corrupted frames. A deer crashing through the brush? A hunter in a jacket? Nothing felt right. The trees were still, no fresh broken branches or footprints near the camera. That afternoon, I stayed until dusk, sitting on a log near the creek, watching for anything out of place. The forest was quiet in a different way. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, just this heavy silence. Pippa was tense, ears twitching constantly. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of something moving just beyond the tree line, a shadow or a flicker. But when I looked directly, nothing was there. Later that night, I checked the footage again. This time, I noticed something else. In the frames before and after the corrupted ones, there was a faint shimmer in the air, like heat haze or a thin veil of mist, but it only appeared briefly around that figure. The next morning, I decided to set the camera back up, but closer to the edge of the clearing, hoping to get a better angle. I also left a small voice recorder running, just in case. Over the next few days, I checked the equipment regularly. Nothing else was corrupted, and the audio captured only normal forest sounds: wind, birds, distant branches snapping. But one evening, while reviewing the footage on my laptop, I saw movement again near the same spot. This time, it wasn't blurred or corrupted, but oddly distant, like it was caught through frosted glass. A tall shape moving slowly among the trees, but no clear details. Pippa started growling softly when I rewound the clip. I tried to explain it away, a trick of the light, maybe fog or dust on the lens. But the more I looked, the less it made sense. A few nights later, I stayed in my cabin at the edge of the forest. It was rainy and cold outside. Pippa was curled up by the fire. I was scrolling through the footage again when I noticed something that hadn't struck me before. Timestamps around the corrupted frames were off by a few seconds, like the camera's clock had glitched right when the figure appeared. The next day, I checked the camera itself. It worked fine, except for the SD card, which I swapped out. After that, the strange appearances stopped. The forest seemed normal again, with regular wildlife and no weird shimmer or shadows. Still, sometimes when I walk that trail alone, Pippa stops and stares off into the trees. She doesn't bark or growl, just watches, tense. I can't shake the feeling that whatever was there, it was aware of me, watching. Maybe it's still there. I don't know what I saw, or what showed up on those corrupted frames. I just know the forest felt different for a while, like something was there, hiding in plain sight. We were out past Craters of the Moon, middle of nowhere, Idaho. 4 of us, me, my cousin Nolan, his girlfriend Callie, and our friend Seth. We'd picked a spot near one of those ancient lava tubes, way off the trails. There weren't any trees out there, just dry grass and rock, and a few scraggly shrubs that looked like they'd die if you so much as looked at them. We brought tents, but ended up sleeping out under the stars the first night. It was early September, so the days were hot, but the nights dipped pretty low. That first night was uneventful. We built a fire, drank a little, and just laid back watching the stars. It was crazy clear, like someone had scrubbed the sky clean. We saw 3 satellites and what Seth swore was a meteor, but honestly, we were all too relaxed to argue. The second night was when the weird stuff started. We'd hiked maybe 5 miles that afternoon. Seth brought a drone and got some footage of one of the collapsed lava tunnels, and Callie found what looked like fossilized bone embedded in a rock wall. Nolan and I laughed it off, but she was dead serious, said it looked too clean to be a coincidence. We made camp on a rise near a dry wash. Nothing but open land in every direction. No people, no structures, no trees. Just those black rocks scattered like someone dumped charcoal across the desert. Around 9 p.m., the wind totally stopped, like completely. 1 second it was tugging at the edge of the tent, and the next it was just still. Not a single breeze. Even the sounds, bugs, birds, whatever, cut out all at once. We all noticed it. I remember Seth saying something like, "You guys hear that?" Which was funny because it was the lack of sound that caught our attention. Then we heard the chimes. It was faint, like hearing someone's ringtone from across a field, but higher pitched, tinkly. Fragile, almost, like real wind chimes, except sharper, more metallic. Not a melody, just random little notes drifting in the air like they were floating on a breeze that wasn't there. Callie asked if we'd brought any gear that could make noise. Nolan said no. I checked my phone. Nothing was open, no apps running, no service anyway. The chimes kept going. Not constant, like a few seconds of sound, then silence, then a few more. And it didn't seem like it was coming from a specific direction. It felt like it was all around us, but far away at the same time. We thought maybe someone else was out there, maybe hikers messing around, but we hadn't seen another car or person since the highway. We turned on our flashlights, 4 of them, and started scanning the horizon, and that's when the second thing happened. All our flashlights flickered at the same time. I don't mean like a loose connection. I mean all 4 beams, mine, Seth's, Nolan's, Callie's, blinked twice, quick and in perfect sync, like someone hit a light switch. We all stopped and looked at each other. No one said anything at first, just looked. Then Callie laughed kind of nervously and said, "Did we just get haunted?" I shook my flashlight like that'd fix something. It was one of those rechargeable ones with the rubber grip. Brand new. Still had a full charge. Seth looked at his too. Same thing. Full battery. But they'd flickered again just once in sync. The chimes had stopped. There was still no wind, no sound. The fire had burned down to coals, but we were all standing now, kind of clustered together. Nolan started scanning the sky with his light, like he expected to see a drone or something. But there was nothing, just stars. We thought maybe there was some kind of frequency interference. Seth said something about solar flares and EM pulses, but it didn't make sense that everything would flicker exactly the same. The odds of 4 different lights glitching in perfect sync? Pretty much 0. We stood there like that for a while, not talking much, just looking out at the dark, waiting for something else to happen. Eventually, things felt normal again. Like something invisible had passed by and kept going. We didn't hear the chimes anymore, and the flashlight stopped flickering. The wind even picked up a little, just enough to rustle the grass. We stayed up another hour, keeping the fire going. No one said it, but we were all waiting, watching. Seth tried scanning with the drone's camera for heat signatures, but it didn't show anything. Around midnight, we finally turned in. The next morning, Seth noticed something weird about his watch. It was one of those Casio digitals with the altimeter and compass. It had reset itself to factory time, like 12 a.m. January 1st. Everything wiped. He swore it was working fine the night before. I checked mine. Analog. Still ticking like normal. Callie had a phone battery bank she kept in her tent, zipped in the side pouch. It was drained. Completely dead. That thing holds enough to charge a phone 3 times, and she hadn't even used it. Nolan made a joke about gremlins. Nobody laughed. Later that day, we found this ring of rocks down in the wash. It looked natural at first, like maybe water had settled them that way, but it was too clean, too deliberate. Perfect circle, about 10 feet wide. Each stone was spaced evenly, and there was nothing in the middle, just cracked, dry dirt. I remember standing there thinking I didn't want to step inside it. None of us did. We packed up early and hiked out that afternoon. No one talked much on the way back. We all agreed it wasn't worth mentioning to anyone else. Not because we were scared, but because we didn't even know what to mention. Hey, our flashlights blinked in unison and we heard some spooky chimes. Who'd care? But it stayed with me. Not in a dramatic, life-changing way. Just a quiet sort of unease that creeps up sometimes when I'm walking the dog at night or driving a dark road. That memory of the sky being too quiet and 4 beams of light blinking together like they were part of something, like something was watching just outside the firelight. We'd driven up to Eagle Ridge late on a Saturday night, just the 4 of us, me, Jess, Sam, and Nate, looking to get away from the city for a bit. The spot's about an hour out on the edge of a state park, a place where the stars really show up because there's barely any light pollution. We'd been talking about it for weeks, something simple, a fire, some beers, and staring up at the sky. The night was clear, not too cold for October with that dry, crisp air you only get in New England. We set up just off the main parking area by some big pines that shaded us from the wind. Nate had this old camping blanket and Jess brought a thermos of coffee she made earlier. Sam tossed a few logs into the fire pit and the flames cracked and popped as the sun went down. I'd never been much into star maps or constellations, but I liked the quiet of being out there, away from everything. We all laid back, faces turned skyward. The Milky Way stretched across above us like a giant spilled bucket of diamonds. We'd been talking casually about whatever, work, dumb mistakes, what movies we hated. Then Jess pointed up. "Look at that," she said, near Orion, by the belt. I followed her finger. There was this cluster of lights, 5, maybe 6, I think, but they weren't blinking like airplanes or satellites. They held steady, and they formed a perfect triangle. Not just any triangle, like it was drawn with a ruler. Sharp, clean edges, and it was spinning, slow and steady, almost hypnotic. Sam squinted. "That's weird. I don't think I've seen anything move like that before." We all stopped talking. The fire crackled, but everything else got quieter, like the world around us was holding its breath. The triangle rotated once, twice, then the shape started to shift. The points, those steady lights, suddenly pulled apart and moved away from each other, breaking the perfect shape. The cluster exploded into individual dots of light, and then each light shot off in different directions. Fast, like nothing I'd ever seen. They weren't planes, not satellites. Those lights moved too quickly, changing course in ways that defied physics. One darted straight up, then did a sharp zigzag. Another dropped down low, disappearing behind the trees in seconds. The rest scattered like fireflies, then all were gone. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds. For a minute, nobody said a word. We just stared at the empty sky, trying to process it. "I'm telling you, that was not normal," Nate finally said, voice low. Jess nodded, her face pale in the firelight. "I'm not joking when I say I felt like something was watching us, like the lights were. Aware." Sam lit another log, trying to shake the tension, but I could tell we were all on edge. We kept looking around the tree line and the dark woods, half expecting to see something moving, but nothing was there. Then the strangest thing happened. Our phones, every single one, lost signal. No service bars, no calls, no texts. We joked it was the usual in the middle of nowhere, but I checked the GPS app and the little arrow showing our location was frozen in place, like the phone itself had lost its sense of direction. I rebooted mine twice, but nothing changed. Jess frowned. I swear it's like this spot is off the grid or something. I glanced over at the trees. The shadows looked deeper than before, almost solid. The usual sounds, the wind through branches, distant animals were gone, or maybe just muffled. The fire was burning low now, but I swear I could hear this faint hum, almost like a distant engine, except it wasn't mechanical. More like a vibration under your skin. We decided to pack up early, nerves getting to us. Nate grabbed the flashlight, and we stuck close, hiking back down the trail toward the parking lot. The woods felt different. Too quiet, the path too dark despite the moon. Halfway down, I stopped. Something felt off. I looked back the way we came, toward the clearing where we'd been sitting, and for a second I thought I saw a faint glow, like a pale light hovering just above the trees. I blinked, and it was gone. "Did you guys see that?" I asked. "See what?" Sam said, but he was already looking around too. "Nothing," I told them, but I wasn't sure. The hairs on my neck stood up. When we reached the parking lot, the cars looked normal, nothing out of place. I unlocked my car and sat down behind the wheel, trying to calm my racing heart. Then Jess's phone buzzed. She pulled it out, one new text message from an unknown number. No words, just 3 white dots. The typing indicator, like someone was writing a message but never sent anything. No reply came. We all sat there, staring at the phones, feeling like something had just brushed past us and left a mark we couldn't explain. The drive back into town was quiet. We didn't say much. The night felt heavy, like something was lingering just out of sight. At home later, I kept checking my phone. The signal slowly came back, but the message was gone. No trace. I've told a few people, but nobody seems to believe me. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, or a cluster of drones, or some weird atmospheric thing. I don't know. But sometimes, when I'm outside late and the sky is clear, I find myself looking for that triangle again. And I wonder what those lights really were, and what it meant that they were watching us. I was out in the Blue Ridge Mountains for a week doing some field work on salamander populations. The place I was camped, Deep Creek Valley, isn't exactly tourist central. It's pretty remote, with thick forests and a few winding dirt roads. I had my gear set up by a small stream, lots of moisture, perfect for the species I was studying. It was early October, so the days were still warm, but the nights were already getting cold. I liked being out there alone. It was quiet in a way that feels like something's missing, if that makes sense. No cars, no planes, just the occasional bird or rustle from small animals. At night, I'd usually sit by the fire, writing notes or reading. On the 3rd day, I started noticing this strange, low hum. It was subtle at first, almost like the distant drone of a machine, but nothing mechanical was nearby. At first, I thought maybe it was a generator from some far-off campsite, but this place doesn't get much traffic. I asked the ranger when I stopped in for supplies, and he just shrugged, said it was probably wind or an animal. The sound didn't feel right, though. It wasn't the usual nature noise. It was steady, continuous, and weirdly deep. Almost felt like it vibrated through the ground. At times, I'd catch myself stopping what I was doing just to listen. It was barely noticeable unless I was really still. I started trying to record it with my equipment, field microphones, and a portable recorder I'd brought for ambient sounds. Every time I got it going, the instruments acted up. The levels would spike or cut out, the recordings came back full of static, or the devices would just freeze completely. It was like the hum interfered with the gear somehow. One evening, after setting up the mics around my camp, I sat with my laptop and headphones, hoping to catch the hum properly. For about 10 minutes, I heard it faintly, this constant low drone beneath everything else. Then, just as I hit record, it stopped, completely, like someone had turned it off. I sat there for a few minutes, headphones on, but all I could hear was the normal night sounds, the crickets, the occasional splash from the creek. I looked around, half expecting to see something out of place, but nothing. The next day, I decided to check my instruments thoroughly. No faults or issues that could explain the weird behavior. Everything worked fine in the morning. That night, the hum came back. Louder this time, but still low and steady. I remember sitting outside, wrapped in a jacket, watching the stars through the treetops. The hum seemed to fill the whole valley, But whenever I tried to get close, like walking toward the source, it got quieter, then disappeared entirely if I stopped moving. There was this odd sensation, too, like the valley itself was holding its breath, or maybe it was me. It wasn't frightening exactly, more like the feeling you get when you realize something is just off, but you can't figure out why. At one point, I thought I saw a shadow move through the trees. Not a deer or bird, just a dark shape sliding silently between trunks. I called out softly, but got no reply. When I looked again, it was gone. The next morning, a couple of the local hikers I ran into said they'd noticed the hum too, but only when they were deep in the valley. They'd thought it was a natural sound or the wind through rocks, but none of them had tried recording it. By the last day, I was more unsettled than anything. I packed up slowly, the hum following me like an unseen presence. When I got to my truck and started the engine, the radio went static for a moment, then cleared. Driving away, the valley fell silent behind me. I didn't hear the hum again. Back at home, I checked my recordings one last time. Nothing but static and silence. The valley, that low sound, the strange effects on my gear, it all stayed a mystery. I was flying my drone out near the coast one late afternoon, just messing around and getting some footage of the shoreline. My name's Julia, by the way. I work as a freelance drone operator, mostly for real estate or small local events. Nothing fancy. This particular day, I was in this small town called Harrow's Point, kind of a sleepy fishing village with rocky beaches and those tall, skinny pine trees that lean like they're always about to fall. The weather was clear but cool, typical early spring, and the sun was low about an hour before sunset. I'd set my drone up on this cliff overlooking the water. The wind was steady, but not too strong, perfect for a few smooth shots. The ocean stretched out wide, and the light hit the waves in a way that looked almost silver. I was just piloting the drone slowly over the edge, trying to catch some footage of the boats bobbing in the harbor when something caught my eye on the drone's screen. Far out past the breakers, maybe a mile or two away, there was this bright flash. At first, I thought it was sunlight reflecting off some kind of boat or a buoy, but it didn't behave like anything I'd seen before. The light shifted suddenly, like it was bending or splitting in weird ways. On the screen, the object looked like it had no solid shape, more like a shifting pattern of gleams, constantly changing angle and intensity. It was reflecting the sunlight at impossible angles. I tried zooming in, moving the drone closer, but every time I got near, the shape just shimmered and shifted. No distinct edges, no shadows, nothing that looked like a solid surface. It wasn't moving much, just floating there above the water, but the way it reflected light didn't make any sense. It was like a mirror that wasn't really a mirror, or a shape made out of liquid light. I called my friend Mark, who's also into drones, to see if maybe my camera or the screen was glitching. He said, maybe some kind of weird reflection off the water? Could be your lens or the sun angle messing with you. But when I told him how it moved, like it wasn't just bouncing light, but actively shifting shape, he got quiet. I kept the drone hovering, watching the object for about 15 minutes. Then, without warning, it blinked out, like someone had switched it off or it just vanished. On the screen, there was nothing but empty ocean and sky. I landed the drone and just sat there staring at the water, feeling weird. No boats nearby, no birds, no planes, just this empty stretch of sea and sky, except I knew whatever that was had been there. I packed up and started walking back to my car along the rocky path when I heard something behind me. This soft, humming noise, like a distant engine, but higher pitched and steady. I turned around, expecting to see a boat or a plane, but the sky was empty. The water was calm. No sign of anything making noise. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe my brain was playing tricks on me after staring at the drone screen for so long. Still, the hum didn't go away for a good 5 minutes. Then, just as I reached the parking lot, it stopped, completely. Driving home, I kept looking at the ocean, half expecting to see that strange shimmer again. But there was nothing, just the regular sunset colors fading behind the horizon. Later that night, I checked the footage. The video file from the drone was fine until the moment the object vanished. Then the file corrupted itself, glitches, flickering frames, and total loss of signal for a few seconds. My phone that I'd connected to the drone also started acting weird, apps freezing, the screen dimming unexpectedly. I had to restart it. I don't know what that thing was or why it disappeared. It didn't look like anything mechanical or natural, at least nothing I'd ever seen before. It's been weeks, and I still think about it sometimes, especially when I'm out flying or near the water. It wasn't just a trick of light. It felt like something else was there, watching or maybe waiting. I kept flying drones after that, but I don't go near Harrow's Point anymore. The ocean there looks the same, calm and quiet, but I remember that shifting light out beyond the breakers. And sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear that low hum again. I'd been camping alone near Twin Pines Lake, out in northern Minnesota, just a couple miles off a logging road. It was late August, and the nights were already getting that crisp edge to them, even if the days still held the sun's heat. I picked the spot because it was quiet, away from the trails and the few cabins scattered around. Just the lake, the trees, and me. I set up my tent in a little clearing just a few feet from the water. There was this patch of soft dirt surrounded by pine needles and moss, perfect for staking the tent. My dog, Willow, a scruffy border collie mix with a white patch over one eye, was curled up at the tent's entrance, half asleep. We'd spent the afternoon hiking and fishing, and I was wiped out. I remember turning off my headlamp around 11 p.m. The lake was dead silent, except for the occasional splash of a fish or a frog croaking in the distance. Willow shifted a couple times, but stayed quiet. I was just about to drift off when I noticed something odd. There was this faint, rhythmic thumping sound coming from the woods across the lake. It wasn't loud, but it was definitely there, sort of like a slow, heavy heartbeat. It stopped after maybe a minute, and then the woods went quiet again. I figured it was probably a moose or some other animal moving around, so I didn't think much of it. I tried to ignore it and get back to sleep, but then I had this weird feeling, like I wasn't alone. Willow's ears perked up and she gave a low growl, staring out into the dark woods. I turned on my flashlight and scanned the tree line, but there was nothing, just shadows and black shapes. I settled back down, but the unease stuck with me. Eventually, I drifted off. When I woke up, it was just before dawn, around 5:30 a.m. The air was chilly, and the sky was this soft gray-blue, heavy with fog rolling over the lake. Willow was gone from the tent entrance, which was strange because she never wandered off without me. I stepped outside, and that's when I saw it. Around the tent, pressed deep into the soft dirt, were these huge impressions. Not footprints, more like shallow pits, perfectly round, spaced out evenly in a pattern I couldn't explain. The holes looked like something heavy had hovered right above the ground and settled down with all its weight, but there was no sign of anything actually there. I knelt down and ran my fingers over one. The dirt was compacted and slightly cracked around the edges, like it had been pressed hard overnight. None of the pine needles or twigs were crushed or broken nearby, just the dirt, perfectly shaped into these strange marks. I looked around the clearing, but the only other footprints were mine and Willow's. No other tracks, no signs of animals, no branches broken or disturbed. The rest of the ground was untouched. I called for Willow, and after a moment, I heard her barking down near the water's edge. I rushed over and found her standing stiffly, staring out across the lake. She didn't come when I called. When I got close, she turned and ran back to the tent, but stayed close to my side after that. The whole area felt off. The usual forest smells were faint, and there was this strange silence, like everything was holding its breath. Later that morning, while I was packing up, I noticed something else. My GPS watch had lost time overnight. It showed that almost 2 hours had passed between when I'd last checked the time and when I woke up. I was sure I'd slept less than 4 hours, but the watch was off by almost 2. I don't know if it was just a glitch, but I double-checked the watch settings and battery. Everything was normal. I decided to pack up and get out early. Willow was still on edge, constantly scanning the woods and whining softly. On the drive back, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us in the trees, but the road was empty. I've gone back to Twin Pines a few times since, but I haven't stayed overnight again. The impressions in the dirt still haunt me, and sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear that faint thumping sound in my own backyard. I was driving east on Route 190, cutting through the Mojave, sometime past 11 p.m. It was mid-August, and even at night, the air felt dry and warm through the crack in the driver's window. I'd left Ridgecrest earlier that night, heading toward Pahrump, where my cousin Kyle lived. I was just planning to crash at his place for a day or two before heading into Vegas. That stretch of road is dead empty. No lights, no towns, barely even any signs. You just pass through scattered Joshua trees and hills that fade into black. I was maybe an hour past Trona, not a single car in either direction for miles. I hadn't seen headlights in maybe 30 minutes. The radio had gone static ages ago. It was sometime around 11:40 when I saw the first flash. Off to the right, far out, almost at the horizon, a bright white light lit up the low hills for a second and then vanished. No sound. Just this sudden, solid flash that lit the desert like lightning, but without the flicker. It looked artificial, not like lightning or heat lightning, more like the flash from a giant camera, if that makes sense. Too steady, too precise. At the exact same moment it flashed, my headlights dimmed, only for a beat, like someone lowered a dimmer switch, and then came right back to normal. I actually said, "What the hell?" out loud and sat up straighter. The battery light didn't come on, and the engine didn't stutter. I watched the dash. Everything looked fine. Maybe just a voltage dip or something, I thought. Old car. I drive a 2011 Civic, so it's not exactly brand new. About 3 minutes later, another flash. Same spot, same silent brightness lighting up the desert scrub. My headlights dimmed again, in perfect sync. Not a second before or after, exactly when that light popped. Like they were tied together. That's when I started getting nervous. I flicked the headlights off and on again. No change. I slowed down a little. I was doing about 70, dropped it to 55. I glanced at my phone, but I had no service. The little SOS only popped up where the bars should have been. I kept watching the right side of the road where the light had come from. There was nothing but dark hills and low desert brush, no towers, no buildings, nothing out there. Then it happened a third time. Same white flash. Maybe a little closer? I couldn't tell. Just this sudden, perfect rectangle of brightness along the horizon, and again, my headlights dimmed with it like someone was flipping a switch. No thunder, no hum, no feeling in the air, just the flash and the dimming. I was fully creeped out by that point. My arms were tight on the wheel, knuckles stiff. I looked in the rearview mirror and didn't see anything behind me. But I slowed more, dropped to maybe 40, which felt way too slow for that road, but I couldn't keep going like nothing was happening. About a mile later, I pulled off the road. There's no shoulder really, just dirt. I parked just enough off the asphalt that I wouldn't get clipped by some semi if one ever came through. I turned off the engine, left the parking lights on. I sat there with my window down, listening. It was dead quiet. No crickets, no wind. Just the sound of the engine ticking as it cooled down. Then, another flash. Same direction, same brightness. But this time, from inside the car, I felt something, like a small thump in the air. Not in the ground, in my chest, like a subtle pressure shift. My headlights weren't even on now, but the parking lights blinked. I swear they flickered for just a fraction of a second during the flash. I turned off all the lights and stepped out of the car. The air was warm, but weirdly still. No breeze, not even the usual desert whisper in your ears. I walked around to the passenger side and leaned on the hood, watching the hills where the light had come from. I couldn't see any source, no glow, just flat dark. I waited maybe 10 minutes. Nothing happened. I was starting to feel dumb, like maybe it was some military thing, maybe even just lightning, despite the clear sky. Then a different light appeared. Not a flash, this was more like a soft pulse. Higher up this time, in the sky. It blinked on for about a second, a soft, white glow like a dying LED, then off. It came back about 10 seconds later in a different part of the sky. Still silent, still weirdly round, not like a strobe or aircraft beacon. I kept watching. Another pulse, higher now. It blinked, moved a bit, blinked again, like it was jumping locations. Always the same soft light. No tail, no streak, just on, but never in the same place. I backed toward the driver's door and got in the car, left it off, just sat there, door open, eyes on the sky. I don't know how long I sat like that, maybe 15 minutes? The pulses stopped at some point, and I didn't see another flash like before. But when I finally turned the engine back on and looked at the dash clock, it said 1:12. I know for a fact I pulled over just after midnight, 11:50 something, when the first flash happened. I remember the number because I thought I'd reach Pahrump around 1. The drive should have been another hour from where I stopped. But now, with the clock showing 1:12, that meant I'd been sitting there for over an hour, which didn't make sense. I hadn't dozed off. I wasn't tired. I'd only had my eyes off the clock for maybe half an hour, tops. But somehow, that extra time was just gone. I drove the rest of the way without stopping. No more flashes, no more pulses, but I kept checking the rearview mirror constantly. The back of my neck felt tight the whole way, like I was being watched. When I got to Kyle's place, I didn't mention any of it. We stayed up drinking and watching reruns, and I just let it sit in my head. I did check my headlights the next morning. Nothing wrong with them. Battery was fine too. The weirdest part? The dash clock stayed exactly synced with my phone the rest of the trip. Never gained or lost a second. I was 16 when it happened. I'd just gotten my first real camera, a Canon T6i I bought secondhand from a guy in town who'd upgraded. I'd been messing around with long exposure astrophotography for a few weeks, mostly shooting out in the field behind our house in central Oregon. We lived near Prineville, nothing but pasture and juniper trees for miles. No streetlights. Barely any light pollution. Perfect for shooting the stars. That night was early August. I remember because the Perseids were supposed to be peaking. I dragged out my tripod and gear around 10:30 p.m., set up at the edge of our backyard, and started doing 20-second exposures of the northeast sky. I had my shutter on a 2-second timer to minimize shake, and I'd shoot batches of 10 or 15 images at a time, then go inside, load them up, and see what I got. It was warm, upper 60s, and still, crickets and the occasional coyote off in the hills, but otherwise dead quiet. My first batch was normal. Clear skies, some faint meteors, Milky Way coming through nicely. I adjusted the ISO, took a few darker shots, then tried a wider angle. Around 11:20 or so, I did another set of 15 exposures. Same angle, same settings, all in a row. Nothing fancy. When I brought the SD card in and loaded the images, I noticed something weird in the second shot of that batch. There was a line. A perfectly straight, evenly spaced line of white dots running left to right, slightly upward across the frame, like a chain of pearls. Not streaked, not blurred. Just a line of maybe a dozen small white lights, dead even, floating mid-frame. It didn't look like a plane. There were no red or green nav lights, no blinking, and it didn't extend through the whole shot like a normal aircraft light trail would. These were fixed, clear, and silent. Even stranger, the images right before and right after didn't show them at all. The shot before, nothing. The shot after, nothing. Same angle, same exposure, taken within seconds. I checked the timestamps. Shot 1, 11:23:14 p.m. Shot 2, with the lights, 11:36. Shot 3, 11:59. That 23-second window was the only time they showed up, and there was no sound. I hadn't heard a thing. I ran back outside, scanned the sky. Nothing. No trails, no moving lights, no satellites overhead. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, watching. Not even a plane. Back inside, I zoomed in on the image. Each dot was uniform. Same brightness, same spacing, no distortion. They didn't look like lens flares or reflections. They were too consistent. If it had been a satellite train like Starlink or something, I should have seen at least some movement across multiple frames. But it was just that one shot. I tried recreating it. I went out the next night, same time, same angle, same everything. Got nothing. Did that for 3 nights. Still nothing. A couple days later, I showed the photo to my science teacher, Mr. Dent. He was into astronomy and had helped me get the right settings early on. He looked at the photo for a while and said it was probably satellites. But when I told him about the timing, how they only appeared in that one exposure, he didn't have much to say. Just gave it back and told me to keep shooting. I uploaded it to a private Flickr folder, never shared it publicly. Something about it made me uneasy. And then, 2 nights after I took that photo, I woke up around 2 a.m. to a noise outside my window. It wasn't loud, just a soft humming, like power lines in the summer when it's really hot. that low, buzzing drone that you feel more than hear. I pulled back the curtain and looked out. There was nothing in the yard, no lights, but the sound was still there, steady, unchanging. I stepped outside in my socks and stood by the tripod, which I'd left out. The hum got a little louder the farther from the house I went. It didn't seem to be coming from above. It felt like it was around me, not directional, just present. I stayed out there for a few minutes, not sure what I was expecting to see. The sky was clear, no planes, no meteors, no clouds. The stars looked normal, but I had the strongest feeling something was off. Then the humming stopped, just gone, like it had never been there. Not faded, stopped. I went back in, locked the door, and sat in the dark for a while. My chest felt tight, like I'd just come down off an adrenaline spike, even though nothing had really happened. The next morning, I checked the camera. I'd left it running that night just in case. It had snapped a couple hundred exposures on the intervalometer. Most were normal, but right around 2:03 a.m., there was a photo where the entire frame was white. Overexposed, blown out, but the EXIF data said 20 seconds, just like the others. The photo before it was fine. The photo after it was black, like the shutter never opened. Then it went back to normal. I checked the lens, nothing wrong. Battery was fine. I reset everything and kept shooting that night. All normal again. I've taken probably 1,000 exposures since then. I've never seen that line of lights again. But I still have the image. I don't show it to people anymore. I don't know why. I was out in my backyard late one night, just like I usually am when the sky's clear. I live in Flagstaff, Arizona, so the light pollution's pretty low, and it's great for stargazing. I'm not a pro or anything, just an amateur astronomer. My setup's simple: a decent telescope, some star charts, and a DSLR to snap photos when I feel like it. I usually just sit out there for hours, tracking constellations or hunting for planets. That night, it was early spring, around 11:30 p.m. The air was dry and crisp, a little chilly but comfortable with a jacket. The moon was just a thin crescent, so the sky was pretty dark. I had been looking at the Hercules cluster for a while, just zooming in and out, taking long exposure shots to try and get a better view of some faint stars. Nothing unusual until I noticed something odd. I'd set the telescope up facing a patch of sky where there's usually a neat little grouping of stars. A cluster I'm familiar with. I remember thinking how clear the stars looked, sharp and steady. Then, through the eyepiece, I saw the whole cluster suddenly vanish. I mean, literally gone. The stars disappeared like someone had flipped a switch. It wasn't just dimming or flickering. The entire circle of stars was just not there. I blinked and moved the scope slightly, thinking maybe I'd lost focus or the clouds were rolling in, but the rest of the sky was fine. The stars around that spot were still there, twinkling as usual. It was just that perfect circle, maybe 10 or 12 stars, that vanished. It stayed like that for exactly 3 seconds, which I timed with my watch because it was so weird I figured I'd better keep track. Then, just as suddenly as they disappeared, the stars reappeared in the exact same positions. I stared at the eyepiece, trying to process what I'd just seen. My heart started beating a little faster. I looked around, checking for any clouds or anything that might have caused the effect. Nothing. The air was clear. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. So I waited a bit and refocused the telescope on the same spot. I didn't want to take another photo right away because the last one came out blurry. Instead, I just watched. After about 10 minutes, the stars in that exact spot flickered again. This time, it wasn't a total disappearance. It was like they dimmed drastically, then slowly brightened back up over a span of maybe 5 seconds. It was subtle, but definitely not normal. At that point, I started feeling uneasy, like I was being watched. My backyard isn't big, but it's surrounded by tall pines, so it's pretty isolated. I glanced behind me, half expecting a neighbor or a late-night dog walker. Nothing. I pulled out my phone to check the photos I'd taken. The images showed the star cluster perfectly visible in the first few shots. Then in the frame, from the exact moment the stars vanished, that circle was just a black hole against the rest of the sky. No stars, no light, just empty space. I couldn't explain it. I showed the photos to a couple of friends who were more into astronomy, but no one had a decent answer. They suggested everything from camera glitches to weird atmospheric interference, but none of it really fit. A perfect sudden disappearance of a specific star cluster for 3 seconds? That's not normal. The next morning, I checked some online sky trackers and astronomical reports. No meteor showers, no solar flares, nothing unusual noted that would cause a cluster of stars to just blink out like that. That night, I went back out to watch again, hoping it was a one-off thing. But as I looked through the telescope, the same spot in the sky started to shimmer faintly, like heat haze on pavement, but in the cold night air. The stars twinkled erratically, almost like they were flickering in and out of existence. I felt like the sky itself was unstable there. I packed up early after that. The feeling I got watching that patch made me want to get inside. I kept the photos on my phone for a while, but after a couple of days, I deleted them. I couldn't shake the feeling that something about those images was off. Like, looking at them too long might pull me into the same weirdness I saw through the scope. Since then, I've been cautious about looking in that part of the sky. I don't get out there as much anymore, and when I do, I stick to familiar constellations far from that spot. I still don't know what I saw. It was real. I know that much. The stars literally disappeared and came back, and nothing I've read or heard explains how that could happen. I guess I'll keep looking up, but maybe not quite as close this time. I was up early that morning, prepping the weather balloon launch out by the outskirts of Amarillo, Texas. It was late April, just before dawn, and the air was cool but already holding the promise of heat for later. I work as a meteorologist for a small private research outfit, mostly routine stuff, sending balloons up to gather upper atmosphere data for storm forecasting. Nothing glamorous, just charts and numbers, but I liked the work. I liked being out where the sky was wide and empty. That day, the launch went pretty much like any other. We set up the balloon and the payload, sensors, radios, a tiny camera pointing down at the Earth. The whole thing was automated except for the launch and the tracking. I was standing next to the basket, watching it rise, the balloon getting smaller and smaller, drifting east with the morning wind. I had the radio scanner on, listening to air traffic chatter from nearby commercial flights. The balloon usually went up for an hour or two before bursting and falling back with a small parachute. After it was airborne and climbing steadily, I decided to pull out my binoculars and watch the horizon. The sunrise was coming fast now, painting everything pale gold. I noticed a tiny bright dot way up high, almost too small to be anything, but it wasn't moving like a plane or a bird. It just stayed there, still like it was watching. I figured it was probably a weather satellite or maybe a drone from a research group. But something about it didn't sit right. The light was a sharp silver, not blinking or flashing, no navigation lights, just a smooth, constant shine reflecting the sun. I adjusted the binoculars to get a better look. The object looked small, maybe a few feet wide, but too far away to be sure. It was hovering, almost perfectly motionless. No sound, no contrails, no blinking lights, no wings or rotors. Just this smooth, metallic glint suspended against the pale blue sky. I tapped the radio and called over to the air traffic controller frequency. "Hey, this is Amarillo Weather Balloon Launch. We're seeing a small object about 20,000 feet up, slightly north of our location. Do you have any traffic or reports on that?" Static filled the channel. Then a calm male voice came through. "No known traffic in your area at that altitude. Nothing on radar matching your description. Are you sure?" I told him what I was seeing and gave rough coordinates, but the response was basically, "Nothing on radar, no other flights nearby." I scanned around the spot again. The balloon was climbing higher now, almost 23,000 feet, heading into commercial airspace, but the object was still there, just beyond the balloon's altitude, maybe another 5,000 feet higher. I was tracking the balloon's telemetry on my laptop, watching the data scroll by. Then I noticed something odd. The balloon's GPS altitude was fluctuating a little more than usual. Nothing extreme, but it was dipping and rising in a way that seemed off for a stable ascent. I checked the camera feed from the balloon. Although it was pointing downward, it caught a little slice of sky above the horizon. At first, the metallic object wasn't in frame, but as the balloon drifted, it slowly edged into view. It was faint, but definitely there. A tiny shape, perfectly round, smooth, and gleaming. After a few minutes, the balloon's data showed an unexpected slowdown. The ascent rate dropped sharply, then leveled off. I looked outside, scanning the sky in that direction, but the object hadn't moved. A sudden wind gust rattled the equipment on the ground. The temperature was starting to climb, and the early morning calm shifted to a steady breeze. I pulled my jacket tighter as the sun came up fully. I was pretty sure I should have contacted someone else, FAA, military, or air traffic again, but I hesitated. The object wasn't doing anything threatening. It just hung there, like a silent watcher. I kept an eye on the screen and binoculars for another 20 minutes. The balloon started to descend slowly, as expected. The object remained still, its metallic surface catching the sun's rays in a way that made it look almost liquid. At one point, a small commercial jet crossed the horizon, heading west, well below the object. The plane's pilot didn't report anything unusual on the frequency I listened to. The balloon's descent was smooth until the altitude dropped below 15,000 feet. That's when the object suddenly vanished. 1 second it was there, the next, gone. No flash, no noise, no trail, just disappeared. I kept looking for it, scanning the sky for a good 5 minutes afterward. Nothing. The balloon's parachute deployed as planned, and it drifted gently down to the ground about 50 miles east of Amarillo. I drove out to retrieve it later that afternoon. Back in the office, I reviewed the flight data again, hoping to find something I'd missed. The altitude fluctuations during the ascent made me uneasy, like something had affected the balloon's buoyancy or pushed against it. But the sensors showed no signs of interference, no electromagnetic spikes, nothing unusual besides the weird changes in altitude. I sent the footage from the balloon's camera to my supervisor, cropped to just the sky portion where the object appeared. But the file looked grainy and distorted in that area. It almost looked like the camera sensor struggled to focus on the object, like light was bending oddly around it. That footage was gone by the next day. My supervisor told me it had been lost during transfer, an error in the server or the hard drive crash. I asked to see backups, but there were none. I checked in with the FAA the following week, asking if there were any unusual reports or radar logs around the time of the launch. They said everything was normal. No unknown objects detected, no flights near the balloon other than the scheduled commercial traffic. I haven't heard about anything like it since. No one else saw it. No one reported anything. The weather balloon program continued as usual, but I kept thinking about that smooth, hovering silver dot up there, watching the sky without a sound. Sometimes when I'm out looking at the clouds, I wonder if it's still up there somewhere, just waiting, completely still, out of sight. It started sometime in March. I wasn't sleeping well to begin with. Stress, work, whatever. I'd go to bed around 10, then just lie there for hours. And when I did fall asleep, it was always the same dream. I was floating, not flying, not falling, just suspended like my body wasn't mine. I couldn't move, couldn't turn my head or wiggle my fingers. I was face up, weightless, like I was underwater, but there was no pressure, no sound, just this sterile, bright space that seemed to stretch out in every direction. The ceiling, if you could call it that, looked like glowing panels, almost like a hospital, but too clean, too symmetrical. Every time I felt like I was being looked at. I couldn't see anyone, but I knew there were things near me. Sometimes I'd catch shadows in the edge of my vision, tall shapes, unmoving. They never touched me, but I always woke up with this electric tension in my jaw, like I'd been clenching all night. I live in a duplex outside of Boise. Suburban edge of town, quiet street. I'm on the left side and my neighbor Glenn lives on the right. We mostly just say hi when bringing the garbage out. I only mention him because of what happened later. The dreams went on every night for almost 2 weeks. I didn't tell anyone, not because I was scared, just because it sounded ridiculous. I figured maybe it was sleep paralysis or some new kind of insomnia. But I started noticing other things. Lights flickering, always in the hallway. The bulb in the ceiling fixture would dim for a second, just barely, like a power dip, but it never happened during the day. Only at night. Only after the dream. and there were these little scratches near the baseboards in my bedroom. Not like animal scratches, I don't have pets, but faint, evenly spaced marks running parallel along the wall, maybe 6 inches from the floor. I tried cleaning them off with a Mr. Clean pad, but they didn't go away. Then there was the noise. I'd wake up sometime between 2 and 3 a.m., lying on my side, and hear this low hum. Not outside, not from the heater or fridge. It was like it was in the air. You could almost feel it more than hear it. Not loud, but constant, like a tuning fork pressed to bone. It made my teeth feel weird. One night I woke up and realized I was lying perfectly flat, arms at my sides, palms down. That's not how I sleep. I always curl up or flip to my stomach. But this time I was just laid out like a plank, eyes wide open, the ceiling light bulb flickering slightly. That hum was louder than usual, almost vibrating the pillow. I sat up fast, heart pounding. The noise stopped, the light stabilized. I didn't go back to sleep. A couple mornings later, I was outside watering the small planter by the driveway, and Glenn came out to grab his paper. He looked like hell, pale, sweaty, dark rings under his eyes. "Rough night?" I asked. He paused, then kind of laughed, but not in a funny way. "You ever have, like, really vivid dreams?" he said. That made my stomach twist. I asked what he meant. "Floating," he said, "every night for the past couple weeks. Bright white room. Can't move. Just floating. Something's always there, but I can't see it. I don't know how to explain it. I keep waking up feeling wrong." I didn't say anything. I must have just stared at him too long, because then he shook his head and said, "Forget it," and turned to go back inside. I followed him, put my hand on his shoulder, told him I'd had the exact same dream. He froze, then sat down on the steps and started crying, like full-on sobbing. I didn't know what to do, just sat beside him and waited. Eventually, he said, "I thought I was losing my mind." He told me about the hum, the static in the walls, the way his clocks kept blinking like the power had gone out, except they were on separate circuits. He'd woken up in the backyard once, barefoot, no coat, freezing, had no idea how he got there. That night we made a plan. Nothing dramatic, just decided we'd both try to stay awake, see if anything happened. Glenn had an old security camera he used to point at his driveway. He said he'd set it up facing his bed. I downloaded a sleep tracking app that took audio recordings whenever it detected noise. We each took half a melatonin, stayed up watching a movie, then went to our own sides around midnight. I didn't remember falling asleep. I just remember being in that same blank space, stiff and paralyzed, staring upward. I wanted to scream, but my jaw wouldn't work. I couldn't even blink. Something tall moved past me, not walking, but gliding. And then the hum ramped up until it wasn't sound anymore, just pure pressure behind my eyes. When I woke up, the sun was already up. 9:30 a.m., I grabbed my phone and opened the sleep app. It had one recording, time-stamped 3:17 a.m. I hit play. It was silent for a few seconds, then there was a metallic click. Then a low, rising hum, same as the one I'd heard before, but louder, more layered. Then a soft voice, but not in English. I couldn't even tell if it was a language. It sounded like whispers run backward through a synth. Then the file just cut off. I ran next door. Glenn opened the door already pale. He didn't sleep either. He said he came to on the floor of his kitchen, shirt inside out. He hadn't been drinking. The camera in his bedroom had turned itself off at 3:16 a.m., but it did save one frame, a still shot. It was mostly dark, just grain from the infrared sensor. But you could see his bed. Empty. The covers were pulled down neatly. In the corner of the frame, there was a shape. Not a person. Too thin. Too tall. The top of its head was flat, no facial features. The arms were long and slightly bent. It was in the room, but it looked wrong, like it wasn't fully there. Like it was bleeding through or glitching. We stared at that image for a long time. Then Glenn deleted it. We didn't talk much after that. We still wave. Still say hi, but we don't bring it up. I haven't had the dream since the last time. Neither has he. But the hum comes back sometimes. Always, for just a second, just as I'm drifting off. Like a reminder. I woke up in a hospital room with no idea how I got there. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed quietly, and the smell of antiseptic filled the air. My head throbbed, and everything felt sluggish, like I'd been underwater for days. Nurses were moving in and out, but no one said much, just the usual check-ins and questions. When I tried to speak, my throat was dry and my voice came out hoarse. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9:17 a.m. I tried to piece together what happened, but nothing came. The last thing I remembered was waking up on my couch Saturday morning, watching the news. After that, a total blank. A doctor came in, kind enough, but clearly as confused as I was. She said I'd been found wandering on a nearby hiking trail 3 days ago, disoriented and dehydrated. They admitted me for observation. When I asked if anyone had reported me missing, she said no. I pressed her about what happened during those 3 days, but she just shook her head. No clue. Then I noticed something on my left forearm. A cluster of tiny scars, perfectly round, about the size of pinpricks, arranged in a tight circle. I didn't remember getting them. They weren't bleeding and there was no swelling, but they looked fresh enough, not more than a week old. I showed the nurse and she examined them carefully. "That's strange," she said quietly. "No idea what could cause marks like this. No burns, no insect bites, no signs of an allergic reaction. We're going to run some tests." I tried to think back to the weekend, to when I might have gotten them. But my mind was like a wall, blank and silent. Later, a friend came by, Mark, a buddy from work. I told him what happened, showed him the scars. He looked concerned but didn't say much except to ask if I was feeling okay. I spent the next 2 days in the hospital running tests. Blood work came back normal, no signs of infection or toxins. The scars didn't match anything the doctors had seen before. I kept asking about cameras or witnesses on the trail, but no one had seen me. No cameras caught me either. It was like I disappeared off the map for those 3 days. On the 3rd day, I was discharged. I went home, but I couldn't shake this feeling that something was off. The scars itched occasionally, a dull, prickling sensation underneath, like something was just beneath the surface. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept waking up, sweating even though my room was cold. When I finally did drift off, I had strange dreams, a soft humming noise, lights moving across the sky, shapes that didn't quite make sense. Over the next week, I kept examining those scars. They didn't heal the way normal wounds did. Instead, they almost looked like they were embedded deeper into the skin, like a stamp that couldn't be washed off. One evening, I was looking at them under the bathroom light when the itching got worse, sharper. I felt a weird buzzing, almost like electricity, around my arm. I caught a faint glow coming from the marks, just for a second, and I swear I saw tiny lines of light pulsing beneath my skin. I rubbed my arm, thinking maybe I was imagining things, but the sensation stayed. I kept feeling like I was being watched, even at home. A few days later, I went back to the trail where I was found. It was early morning, fog rolling through the trees, and everything was damp and quiet. I walked the path slowly, trying to find any clue, something I might have missed before. I found a small clearing, surrounded by old pine trees. The ground was strange there. Patches of dead grass and some rocks that looked like they'd been moved recently. In the center, the earth was oddly smooth, as if something had pressed down hard and left an imprint. I crouched down and saw faint marks in the dirt, long, thin, like claw scratches, but too even to be natural. I ran my fingers over them, feeling cold despite the morning chill. Suddenly, the hairs on my neck stood up. A low humming sound filled the air, soft but unmistakable. It felt like the air itself was vibrating. I stood up fast, looking around. No one else was there, just the trees swaying and the fog thickening. I turned to leave, but noticed something glinting near a tree root. I picked it up, a small metallic object, smooth and cold. It wasn't like any metal I'd handled before. It was light but heavy at the same time, with a strange warmth under my skin when I held it. I put it in my pocket and left the clearing quickly. The humming stopped as soon as I stepped back onto the trail. At home, I examined the object under a magnifying glass. It was perfectly round, no visible seams or markings, like it was crafted with precision beyond anything I'd seen. That night, the buzzing returned, stronger this time, and the scars on my arm pulsed with a faint blue glow. I couldn't sleep, kept watching my arm as the light seemed to shift just beneath the surface. The next morning, the scars looked a little different. The circle had expanded, and I could swear the marks were rearranging themselves, like they were alive, moving in patterns I couldn't understand. I called the hospital again, desperate for answers, but they told me to come in for another checkup. When I got there, the doctors took one look and were just as baffled. They ran more scans, but nothing showed up on the x-rays or ultrasounds. No foreign objects, no injuries below the skin. The scars didn't hurt, but they felt invasive, like a silent presence embedded in me. I asked if anyone else had ever had something like this. One nurse hesitated and mentioned an old case about unexplained skin markings on hikers, but couldn't say more. I left the hospital feeling more unsettled than ever. Back at home, the object I found started to hum softly when I was near it. It felt like it was responding to me, like it was connected to those scars. I tried to throw it away once, but found it back on my nightstand the next morning. No idea how it got there. In the weeks that followed, the buzzing and glowing became part of my daily life. I avoided mirrors because sometimes in the corner of my vision, I'd catch glimpses of shapes moving, not people, more like shadows shifting in impossible ways. I stopped telling people about it. Friends noticed I was distracted, maybe anxious. I wasn't sure how to explain what was happening. One night, I woke suddenly, feeling like I was falling. The room was spinning slowly, and that humming sound filled my ears, loud and insistent. I looked down at my arm, and the scars were shining brightly now, pulsing in rhythm with the buzzing. I felt a strange pressure behind my eyes, like a veil being pulled back. I closed my eyes, waiting. Then it stopped. The light faded, the buzzing ceased, and I was left in silence. After that night, the scars slowly faded over a few days, the glow disappearing entirely. The humming went silent. The object stopped responding. I kept the object, though, locked in a box. I don't know what it is or where it came from, and I still don't remember those missing 3 days. But sometimes when I'm alone and quiet, I swear I can hear that humming again, faint, distant, like a signal reaching out from somewhere beyond. I was hiking alone near Tikaboo Peak last fall, late October. The weather was still warm during the day, but it cooled off fast after sunset. I'd gone out there to get away for a few days, no real plan besides walking, sleeping under the stars, and being somewhere quiet. I didn't go all the way up the peak since I didn't want to mess with the restricted zone too much. I just parked a little ways off Groom Road and hiked in a wide loop along the foothills to the south, staying clear of the perimeter signs. It was my second night out. I'd set up camp in a wash, cooked some instant noodles, and climbed up a nearby ridge to watch the sun go down. The view out there is insane. The desert stretches flat for miles, and the light hits it in that deep orange way where everything looks like it's flickering. I was sitting there on a rock, just watching shadows crawl across the valley floor, when I noticed something moving across the flats, maybe 8 or 9 miles out. At first, I thought it was just dust devils or mirages. The heat can play tricks on your eyes out there. But after a minute, I realized it was a convoy. Looked like trucks, 6 or 7 in a loose line. No lights on, but the sun was low enough that their shapes stood out clearly. Big, rectangular, with high backs. They moved together like military transports, the kind with canvas covers over the beds. That wasn't unusual for that area. Everyone knows what's out there, and you're bound to see some weird government stuff if you stick around long enough. I figured they were just on some patrol or maybe hauling equipment. I pulled out my binoculars and watched them for a while. That's when I noticed something was off. First, there was no dust. Nothing. The whole desert floor out there is dry as hell, and anything moving that fast, and they were fast, should have been kicking up a serious trail. But the air behind them was completely still. Second, there was no sound. It was dead quiet. I could hear the wind against the rock I was sitting on and a plane way up high, but nothing from the trucks, not even a low hum. Third, the way they moved didn't seem right. They stayed perfectly spaced. Too perfect. No corrections, no slight swerves, no variation in speed, just gliding in a clean line across uneven desert terrain like they were on tracks. But there's no road out there. I checked my topo map later, just open desert. I watched them until they reached a stretch near a dry lake bed, and then they did this weird staggered turn, one after another, like a ripple moving backward through the line. It was so fast and synchronized that I actually laughed a little. It looked choreographed. Then, they vanished. I don't mean they sped away or went over a hill. I mean I blinked and they were gone. 1 second they were there, the next they weren't. I stared through the binoculars for a long time after that, scanning every inch of the valley. Nothing. No dust, no shapes, no shadows. Just empty ground. I stayed on that ridge until it got too cold, then made my way back to camp. I told myself it was some visual trick, maybe atmospheric interference or whatever, but I kept waking up through the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd picture that line of trucks moving like ghosts across the sand. Next morning, I packed up and started heading back toward the truck. I kept checking behind me without meaning to. I don't usually get spooked hiking solo, but something about the air that day felt wrong. Heavy, still, like being watched. About halfway back, I stopped to eat and rest in the shade of a boulder. That's when I noticed something new. There were tire tracks nearby, not fresh, but not old either. Big ones, dual tread, like what you'd see on military vehicles, but they didn't follow any trail. They cut across scrub brush through dips and rises in a line too clean to be natural. I followed them for about 20 yards before they just stopped. No curve, no fade out, no turn, just ended in the middle of the desert. The ground wasn't disturbed past that point. No footprints, no drag marks, no animal prints, just untouched dirt. I didn't like it. I turned around and went straight back to my truck. On the drive out, I passed one white SUV parked near the boundary signs. No markings. Tinted windows. I slowed down a little out of curiosity and the driver looked up at me. Just a man in dark sunglasses. He didn't wave, didn't nod, just watched me until I drove out of sight. I haven't been back since. The night it happened, we were all outside in the backyard, just the four of us. Me, my wife Lisa, and our two kids, Abby and Max. It was one of those late summer evenings in northern Michigan, where the air gets cool but not cold, and the sky is clear enough to see a billion stars if you just look up. We'd been sitting around a small fire pit, roasting marshmallows and talking about nothing in particular. Max was trying to convince Abby that his flashlight could cut through anything, just kid stuff. The whole yard was lit by the fire and some old string lights Lisa had hung up along the deck railing. That's when Abby pointed up, all of a sudden quiet, just staring toward the woods at the edge of our property. "Look," she said, whispering. I followed her gaze and saw 3 perfect circles of light drifting slowly across the yard. They were about the size of basketballs, maybe a little bigger, and they glowed with this soft, almost oily white light. Not like bulbs or flashlights, more like light without a source, like they were just hanging there in the air. They moved slowly, side by side, no sound, no flicker, just steady and smooth, like they were gliding on invisible rails maybe 2 or 3 feet above the grass. Lisa and I exchanged a glance, then she asked, "Do you see that?" Max was wide-eyed, frozen next to Abby. I tried to keep calm, but honestly, I didn't know what to say. I grabbed my phone, thinking to get a picture, but when I unlocked it and pointed it toward the lights, the screen just went black. No camera, no flashlight, nothing. Like the phone was dead, even though it wasn't. We watched those lights drift slowly toward the tree line and then disappear behind the pines, leaving no sound, no rustling branches, no movement at all. We all just stood there for a minute, not saying much. The fire crackled. Max finally broke the silence with, "What was that?" I didn't answer. Later that night, I kept checking the yard from the kitchen window, but nothing else showed up. The night went back to normal, the usual sounds of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. Next morning, Lisa was the first one to notice something strange. "Our neighbor, Mr. Garrison," she said. "He was talking with some guy, wearing a black jacket, black pants, like he was trying to disappear in the morning fog." I'd seen Mr. Garrison a couple of times before, an older guy who kept to himself mostly. Lisa said the man in black didn't stay long, just stood close and spoke quietly for maybe 5 minutes, then got into a dark sedan and drove away. I wanted to ask Mr. Garrison about it when I saw him later that day, but when I brought it up, he just blinked and said, "I didn't talk to anyone." That didn't sit right with me. I mentioned it to Lisa, and she told me she'd noticed something else too. Our mailbox had been opened, even though we always lock it. Inside was a black folder, one of those thin, slick plastic ones with no writing or label, I opened it, expecting to find papers or something, but it was empty. What caught me off guard was how warm it felt, like it'd been sitting in the sun all day, even though it was early morning and still cool outside. I put the folder on the kitchen table, but it didn't cool down for hours. That night, the kids were restless, and Lisa kept glancing out the windows like she expected to see those lights again. I didn't want to bring it up, but the tension was thick. The next few days were uneventful, but we all felt watched. The kind of feeling you get when you realize you're not alone but can't see who else is there. I started hearing noises at odd times. The faintest humming, sometimes right outside the window, but sometimes inside the walls. Not loud enough to be sure, but enough to make me stop and listen. One morning, the black folder was gone. No note, no sign it was taken. Just gone. I asked the neighbors if they'd seen anything strange, but no one had. Mr. Garrison kept to himself, eyes darting away when I looked his way. We didn't see the lights again, but that feeling never really left. We went back to our routines, but every now and then, when I'm outside alone, I catch a glimpse of something just beyond the edge of the yard. A flash of white light, a shifting shape between the trees. And every time I wonder if someone's still watching. I was flying a small private plane near Groom Lake, Nevada, on a late afternoon flight back in early April. The sky was clear with just a few wisps of cirrus clouds, and the air was crisp but calm. I do a fair amount of flying for work and pleasure, mostly around Nevada and California, but this trip was just a quick round to drop off some paperwork in Las Vegas and then head home to Reno. I was cruising at about 7,500 feet, doing a straight line southwest from Groom Lake toward Las Vegas. Nothing special about the flight so far. I'd done it dozens of times. I was in a Cessna 182. Just me in the cockpit, running autopilot and keeping an eye on the instruments. The radio was mostly quiet, except for a few routine check-ins with flight control. About 40 minutes into the flight, something odd caught my eye on the right wingtip. At first, I thought it was a reflection. The sun was hitting the wing at a sharp angle and maybe the glare was playing tricks. But the thing didn't look like a typical glare or lens flare. It was this perfectly smooth, mirror-like shape, hovering about 100 feet off my right wing. I adjusted my sunglasses and leaned forward. It was about the size of a small car, maybe smaller. No visible edges or seams. Just this featureless reflective surface that perfectly mirrored the sky and the wing beneath it. The reflection was so precise, it was almost like looking into a polished sheet of metal, except it wasn't part of the plane. I checked my instruments, trying to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Altimeter steady, airspeed normal. The plane was stable, no sudden turbulence. My heart rate picked up a bit. Not from fear, just surprise. I've flown a lot, and I've never seen anything like this. I reached for the radio to see if anyone else reported something in the area. Nothing. No chatter, no reports of other traffic. I tried the transponder, code 1200, the usual visual flight code. The radar was quiet, no blips anywhere near me. I pulled back the throttle a bit, watching the object as it kept pace exactly with my wingtip. It didn't move around or flicker. It stayed perfectly positioned, matching my speed and heading, almost like it was locked in. I turned the plane slightly to the left, testing if it would break formation. It didn't. The object mirrored my moves, holding its position relative to the wingtip with flawless precision. I grabbed my phone and tried to film it through the small side window, but the reflection on the glass and the speed of the plane made the image useless. Just a blur of sky and wing. I put the phone down after a few seconds, realizing this wasn't something I could capture well. For what felt like several minutes, maybe 5 or 6, the thing stayed there, completely silent, no engine noise, no lights, no vibrations, just this smooth, mirror-like shape floating beside me. The sky behind it reflected perfectly, but I could never catch a glimpse of anything inside or behind it. I tried calling flight control again. Control, this is N123DP. Do you have any traffic in my vicinity? No response. Then I checked the onboard radar scope. It was blank. No targets within a 20-mile radius. I was trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Was it a drone? But it was too big and too smooth, and I didn't hear any engines or see any propellers. Could it be a weather balloon? No. Weather balloons don't hover like that or keep pace exactly. Could it be a refraction of light or some atmospheric effect? I'm no scientist, but the sky was clear and the thing was so well defined. After about 7 minutes, the object started to slowly pull away, moving backward relative to my wingtip. It shimmered briefly, then disappeared into the distance as if it vanished. I felt the need to verify everything again, but my instruments and plane felt fine. No warning lights, no system faults. When I landed in Las Vegas, I immediately checked the FAA traffic logs for that time. No unknown aircraft or unidentified radar blips. The tower controller told me nothing unusual had been reported. I told the people I flew with about it, but most just laughed it off. Must have been some weird glare or your mind playing tricks. But I kept thinking about how clear and solid it looked, and how the compasses and instruments didn't glitch at all. Driving home that night, I noticed a subtle hum in the car's stereo system, not coming from the speakers, but something faint beneath. I turned everything off, and it stopped. In the following days, I kept checking my flight log and the instruments that's on my plane. No errors. But sometimes, late at night, when I look at the wingtip, I swear I can feel that strange presence again. Like something's watching, just out of sight. It's the only time I've ever seen something that clearly didn't belong in the sky, and yet left no trace anywhere but my own eyes. I was volunteering that summer at Cedar Hollow Park, the kind of place where the woods run deep and the city noise fades away completely. I'd done trail maintenance and visitor help for a few months, mostly early mornings and late afternoons. That week, I was on the night shift, helping the rangers close up the station after dark, just keeping an eye on things and making sure no one wandered off the trails after hours. The night I'm talking about was clear and cold, the kind where the moon hangs bright and sharp, throwing long shadows through the trees. I had stayed late at the station to finish some paperwork after the last group left around 11 p.m. The whole park was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves or the far-off call of an owl. I decided to take a quick walk before locking up, just to stretch my legs. I headed down one of the lesser-used trails that ran along the edge of the park, near the old oak grove. The air smelled like damp earth and pine needles, and the moonlight filtered through the branches in thin, pale strips. That's when I saw it. A smooth, almost perfect shape drifting silently between the trees. It caught the moonlight so sharply it looked like a mirror floating just above the ground, reflecting everything around it. The branches, the sky, the faint glow of the moon itself. I stopped dead, my heart skipping a beat. It wasn't moving like an animal or anything I'd ever seen. No wings, no legs, just sliding slowly, smoothly, like it was gliding on some invisible current. I blinked, trying to make sense of it, but it stayed there for maybe 20 seconds, just drifting between the trees, before disappearing deeper into the shadows. I thought maybe it was some kind of weird piece of trash, a shiny tarp or a sign blown loose, but nothing moved or flapped in the wind. It was completely silent and steady, like it was alive, but cautious. I pulled out my phone, but when I looked back, it was gone. No trace. No trace. I called out softly, but the woods swallowed the sound. I didn't want to follow it. Instead, I headed back to the station, feeling a little on edge, but telling myself I was probably just tired and seeing things. The rest of the night was uneventful. I locked up, checked the gates, and turned off the lights. But as I was about to leave, I noticed headlights cutting through the trees at the far end of the parking lot. A black SUV rolled up slowly, stopping right near the ranger station. The windows were darkly tinted and there was no visible license plate. The engine was quiet, almost too quiet for a vehicle that size. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He wore a black suit, nothing fancy but pressed and neat. His shirt was white and his tie was perfectly straight. He looked clean-shaven, but there was something off about him, like he didn't quite belong in that place or time. He walked over without a word and stopped right at the door. His eyes scanned the station for a moment before settling on me. "You volunteer here?" he asked, voice calm but low. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual, though I was still keyed up from what I'd seen earlier. "Just finishing up for the night." He nodded slowly, then pulled out a badge of some kind. It wasn't official looking, no government seal or emblem. Just a plain metal rectangle with a few letters I didn't recognize. "I'm with a special agency," he said. "We're taking over operations in this area." I raised an eyebrow. "Taking over?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Effective immediately. You're to file your reports elsewhere." I blinked, not sure how to respond. "My reports? What reports?" He tapped a folder under his arm. "Anything unusual you've encountered? Any observations, sightings, or incidents?" I swallowed. "I haven't had anything like that." He nodded like he expected me to say that. "Good. Then there should be no problem." The whole thing felt strange, too formal, too rehearsed, like a scene from a movie. I wanted to ask more, but got the impression he wasn't here to chat. He glanced back at the SUV, then turned to me again. "Stay clear of the old oak grove at night," he said. "No more volunteers allowed past closing hours." Before I could answer, he walked back to his vehicle, slid in, and the SUV disappeared down the road, leaving me standing in the empty lot under the cold moonlight. The next day, I went back to the park office to find all the usual paperwork gone. Nothing on the desks, no files in the cabinets. The rangers, who usually worked there, acted like nothing was different. But the old oak grove was blocked off with new signs. Restricted area, no entry after dark. I didn't tell anyone about the mirrored object or the man in black. Honestly, it felt like I wouldn't be believed. But the whole time, I kept wondering what exactly he meant by filing reports elsewhere, and what they were so interested in hiding out there in the trees. Sometimes when I'm out walking at night now, I catch myself looking toward the oak grove, half expecting to see that strange silver shape again, drifting silently through the branches. But it never shows, and I'm left wondering if it ever really was there at all. I was working the night shift on the highway crew out near Cedar Creek, just outside of town. It was late spring, but the nights were still chilly, and the sky was mostly clear, with a thin layer of clouds drifting low enough to blur the stars. We were fixing a stretch of road that had been cracked by frost, and the bright floodlights on our truck lit up the site like a small day in the middle of the night. Our crew was just 4 of us: me, Jay, Marcus, and the foreman, Steve. We'd been rotating shifts for weeks, so this wasn't anything new. Usually the night shifts felt dull, just the sound of jackhammers and the hum of the lights, but that night, something felt off. We were halfway through the job when I noticed it first. There was this shadow that moved fast, way above us, passing over the lights. It wasn't like any bird or plane I'd ever seen. It was disc-shaped, or at least close to it, and completely silent. I pointed it out to Jay, and he saw it too. He's the skeptic in our group, but even he stopped mid-sentence to watch it drift across the sky. It disappeared behind the trees on the far side of the road. We joked about it for a bit, saying maybe it was some weird kind of drone, but none of us had ever heard of anything like that in these parts. We went back to work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Around 2 a.m., the air got colder, and the clouds thickened. I was stacking cones near the edge of the road when headlights appeared through the fog, cutting straight through the mist. A black rental pickup pulled up slowly and stopped near our equipment truck. Steve walked over, squinting through the fog. A man got out of the truck. He was dressed in a black suit, but it was weird. The fabric looked too stiff and perfect, like it was brand new but somehow matte, not shiny. His shoes made no noise on the gravel, and he didn't say anything at first, just stared at us. Then he pulled out this small handheld scanner and waved it over our helmets, like he was checking for something. It beeped quietly a couple of times when it scanned me, and then the others. "Your shift's moved," he said, his voice flat, almost mechanical. "Pack up." Steve frowned. "Moved? Where?" "No longer your jurisdiction," the man said, folding the scanner away. He looked around like he was expecting someone, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "Orders come down, effective immediately." Steve took the paper, unfolded it. I could barely make out the words, but the top said Cedar Creek Project, and there was a big red stamp that said confidential. The rest was hard to read in the dim light, but it mentioned a temporary halt and reassignment to a different location, nowhere familiar. I asked the guy, "Who sent you?" He just looked at me for a long second, like I wasn't supposed to be there. You won't get any more details. You'll receive new instructions." Then he turned and walked back to the truck, engine running before he even sat down. The headlights blinked once, and the truck disappeared into the fog just as suddenly as it had come. We all stood there, silent. Steve looked at the paper again and then crushed it in his hand. Jay broke the silence. "That's the weirdest shit I've seen on any shift." Marcus nodded. "You sure that wasn't some kind of prank?" I wasn't so sure. The guy had that odd way of moving, like he didn't quite belong there. His eyes were too cold, and the scanner thing? I'd never seen equipment like that on any job site. We started packing up, but something didn't feel right. As we loaded the tools, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those lights or that shadow again. But the night stayed quiet. When we left, the road behind us was empty, like nothing had happened. The next day, no one mentioned the shift change. Steve called the dispatcher, but they said the schedule hadn't been updated and the project was still on. We tried to get back that night, but the gate to the worksite was locked. The official signs had changed too. New notices that weren't there before, warning about restricted access for safety reasons. The whole area felt sealed off, but no one could tell us why. Weeks later, I ran into a former coworker who works at the county office. I asked if he'd heard anything about Cedar Creek. He hesitated, then said, "Some people noticed strange lights out there, but nothing official. The whole thing's hush-hush now." That's all I got. I don't know what the shadow was or who that suited guy really worked for. But I know our shift ended that night, whether the paper said so or not. The whole thing just hangs there, like something you half see out of the corner of your eye, but when you look straight on, it's gone. I walked out of the cabin just before sunrise, the sky a pale slate blue, with low clouds hanging over the pines. Baxter, my mutt, thumped along at my heel, ears perked for squirrels or deer. I'd been doing this trail for years, 2-mile loop through national forest land near Cedar Creek, but that morning felt different. The air was damp, like it had rained overnight, and the usual chorus of birds was strangely muted. We followed the dirt path until it forked near a small brook. Baxter splashed in the shallow water while I wrung out my shirt sleeve and drank from my canteen. That's when I saw it, a break in the trees off to my left, maybe 30 feet from the trail. I'd never noticed a clearing there before. Curious, I crossed the wet ground and pushed through a few branches. The clearing was maybe 20 feet across, ringed by half a dozen mature oaks and maples. Each tree had its bark stripped away in a perfect band from the base up to exactly 6 feet, not 1 inch higher or lower. The exposed wood was smooth and pale, like someone had shaved it clean with a razor. No ragged edges, no splinters or chips on the ground, just tidy, horizontal lines circling every trunk. Baxter sat at the edge of the clearing, hackles slightly raised, staring in. I stepped forward, peering at the nearest oak. I ran my finger along the stripped surface, cool, almost slick to the touch. No tool marks, no grooves, nothing to suggest an axe or saw, just gone. A chill slid down my spine. I glanced back toward the trail. No footprints in the mud, no broken branches, no discarded bark anywhere. I swept my flashlight beam along the forest floor. Fallen leaves lay untouched by bark or boots. Baxter whimpered once. I crouched and put a hand on his collar. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, trying to calm him, though I felt anything but calm. He wouldn't step into the circle, shaking his head as if the ground burned. I reached into my pocket for the phone, but realized there was no signal this far in. I clicked it off. I circled the clearing, measuring in my head, exactly the same height on each tree, exactly level. Someone had to have done it intentionally. But who? And why here? In the middle of nowhere? I called Baxter to me. He padded up to my side and pressed against my leg. I patted his head, heart thudding in my chest. I was about to tell him to follow me back to the trail when I heard something. Soft, like a breeze brushing needles overhead. But the air was still. The fog pressed close around the clearing, muffling sounds. Birds stayed silent. Even the brook's rush sounded distant. I shined my flashlight into the canopy. Through the low clouds, a sliver of light showed waving branches, but nothing moved. No wind. I felt watched. I took one more look at the stripped bark, memorizing the crisp edge. Then I turned and hurried back to the trail, Baxter at my heels. Leaves crunched underfoot, normal sounds returning once I was out of the clearing's hush. The forest seemed relieved, as if that circle had held its breath and let it out when we left. I reached the cabin shaking. My hands fumbled for keys. Inside, I closed the door behind me and leaned back against it, panting. Baxter scratched at the wood, whining. I scooped him into my arms, his fur damp, his eyes wide. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring out the window at the woods. The fog drifted between trunks, hiding the ground. I wondered if I dreamt it, but the chill in my fingers said otherwise. I texted my friend Aaron, who'd done forestry work nearby. Ever heard of bark stripping like that? Perfect bands, no damage around, no tracks. No reply. I turned off the lights and left the window open. My porch light lit the edge of the trail but reached no farther. All day, I avoided the clearing. I kept the curtains closed, checked the locks on the door. Baxter followed me around, sniffing corners, uneasy. I called Ranger Station in town, left a voicemail describing the spot. No one called back by evening. That night, I dreamed of trees bending down to peer through my window. Their trunks were smooth bands of white, stepping toward me on invisible roots. I woke when Baxter whined at the bedroom door and pawed to come in. I let him up, and he climbed onto the bed, turning his head toward the darkness outside. In the morning, I went back, this time with a notebook and a tape measure. Sunrise sliced through the fog, but when I reached the clearing, the light band was gone. The bark had regrown. Not fully, but a thin, papery layer covered the wood, scabby and irregular. The 6-foot mark was barely visible, worn by night's condensation. No fresh cuts, no debris. A few tufts of light-colored flake clung to the roots, but they disintegrated when I touched them. I sat on a fallen log, writing down my measurements. Even the leaves looked altered. Edges curled, color paler near the tree line. Baxter sniffed at the ground, nose twitching. He wouldn't step into the center, same as before. I took photos, marking the GPS coordinates, then backed away. The forest returned to normal, birds singing, breeze fluttering. I walked the trail out without looking back. That afternoon, I sorted the pictures at home. The first set from my phone showed dark trunks. The clearing's ring was a solid brown. In the middle, nothing. Then a second batch from the old point-and-shoot in my backpack captured the pale rings. The angle was slightly off, but the cut edges were there, clear and crisp. One photo stood out, a shot of Baxter sniffing at the edge. In the top right corner, where the fog hovered, the image shimmered, a faint, out-of-focus swirl like condensation on the lens. I zoomed in, but it resolved into nothing. No shape, no color. Just a blur that hadn't been visible in the live view. I've been back to that trail twice since. Each time the ground looked normal. No 6-foot rings, no bark fragments, no odd fog patches. Baxter stayed close to me, ears forward, sniffing the branches, but not whining. I keep the photos on my desk. Every so often, I pull up the close-up of Baxter in the clearing, stare at the faint swirl in the sky. I don't know what stripped those trees or why Baxter refused to cross that line. I don't know why the bark seemed to regrow overnight, but I remember the hush of that circle, the way the air bent around it, and how I fled without casting a single fishing line into my own morning calm. I saw the scorch mark first thing at sunrise. I was driving the crew truck down County Road 42, heading to the site just north of Willow Creek, when the headlights caught it. A dark circle, almost perfect, about 2 feet across, right in the center of the right lane. The pavement around it was normal asphalt. This spot looked baked, like someone had held a blowtorch on it until the surface bubbled. No cracks, no debris, just a round, hard-edged patch of charcoal. I parked between the cones, grabbed my hard hat and flashlight, and crossed the road. The air smelled funny, like burning rubber mixed with ozone. I crouched, shined the light. The circle was smooth, almost glassy, reflecting the beam. I ran a gloved finger along the edge. Sharp. No chips. I tapped the center, hollow sound like hitting a lid. I shivered, thinking of what could have done this. I clipped my radio mic. Base to crew, come in. I've got something odd on County 42, mile 5.7. No response. Everyone was already out marking potholes on Route 99. I picked up a rock, flicked at the circle's edge. No mark. I dropped it and pounded my fist on the pavement. It didn't dent. I pulled out my phone, snapped a photo, Autofocus struggled. The image was grainy, a perfect black ring in gray pavement. I stood and checked my watch. 6:12 a.m. The sun was orange behind the cottonwoods. I called dispatch, but they said crews were still mobilizing and wouldn't reach me for another hour. I shrugged, climbed back in the truck, and drove south to grab coffee. The road was empty, two-lane ribbon through farmland, corn stalks bent in a light breeze. I felt like someone watched me from the fields. At the diner in Ibis, I ordered black coffee and a sausage biscuit. I told the waitress, Maria, about the mark. She frowned and said her brother said he saw something in a crop circle out by Tiller's Mill last night. Said it glowed blue then faded. I frowned. Different shapes, but same idea. Perfect geometry, no explanation. Back at the site around 7:30, the crew finally showed. Ahmed and Lena, armed with shovels and metal detectors. I led them across the cones. Ahmed knelt and ran his detector over the ring. No beep. Lena scraped at the edge with a trowel. Dust came away. No metal fragments. We dug a foot down, solid earth. No hidden device. The circle stayed glued to the asphalt. We logged it as unidentified pavement anomaly, and I marked the corners with spray paint. Red, yellow, red, yellow. Everything felt off. At 8:45, I took the truck for water and cigarettes, stood in the shade of a power pole, smoking, looking at the burn mark. In the sky, a single helicopter swept the county line. No banner, just a search pattern. It passed north to south 3 times, rotor noise distant. I wondered if it saw the circle too. I called up on the radio, "Base, is anyone flying recon?" No answer. By mid-morning, the county rep arrived, sharp suit, gray hair, sunglasses despite the overcast. He pulled into the site in a black sedan, engine off. I walked over. "Morning," I said. "You the one who called this in?" He didn't smile. He flipped a badge, no logo, just C. Langford, Special Investigator. He set it down and leaned on the hood. "You found the pavement mark?" I gestured. "Yeah, I'm Sam Nguyen, County Highway District 7. That's it right there." I pointed at the circle. No idea what made it. We dug down, nothing. He nodded once. "Interesting." He pulled a small booklet from his jacket and scribbled a note. "Any unusual readings?" He tapped the notebook. "Radiation? Heat anomalies?" "Nope," I said. "Thermal camera was normal, no Geiger response, just looks burned. Smells weird. No tracks or anything." He looked at the ground, squatted, and ran a gloved hand over the surface, careful not to touch the center. Then he stood and snapped the notebook shut. "We'll need to keep this off the record." He looked me in the eye. "No reports, no photos beyond initial intake." I felt a pinch in my gut. "You want me to delete the pictures?" He tapped the sunglasses. "Just hold them. If anyone asks, you never found anything. You patched it and moved on." I shook my head. "I can't do that. County policy, any safety hazard gets logged." He straightened and brushed dust off his suit. "This isn't policy. It's an order." He paused. "You'll understand later." He reached into his coat, pulled a card, slid it across the hood. "Here's my contact. If anyone asks about District 7 anomalies, you tell them you referred it to me." He tapped the card again. "Capiche?" I looked at the card. No agency name, just a phone number and a name. C. Langford. No title, no logo. I slid it to my jacket pocket. He nodded, got into the black sedan, and left without looking back. I stood by the circle. Crickets sounded in the grass, distant engines on the highway. Lena and Ahmed watched from the cab, brows furrowed. I waved them over and told them to cover the hole with cold mix, smooth it out, no mention of the circle. Ahmed hesitated, but I shook my head. Company policy, if the boss says cover it, cover it. We troweled black asphalt over the mark until it blended with the pavement. I ran the roller over it twice, then packed up. On the drive home, the county card burned a hole in my pocket. I stared at the number. Outside Ibis, I saw the helicopter again. Same pattern. It passed overhead, rotor blades slicing gray sky into shadow. I felt fingers of dread trace my spine. I got home around noon, rain starting, dripping off my jacket. I threw my keys on the table, stripped off work boots, showered. In the bathroom mirror, I looked tired, dark circles, pale skin. I dried off, dressed, then sat at the kitchen table with my phone. I stared at the card. C. Langford, Special Investigator, so special no one else knows him. I considered calling the number, but my finger hovered. I poured coffee, black, like this morning. I ate a cold sausage biscuit left on the counter. Outside, the rain picked up, tapping the window in sync with my pulse. I heard a car pull into the drive. My neighbor, Miss Carter. She knocked. I opened the door. She was soaked. She asked about the highway crew. I said we had a routine patch. She nodded and said her son saw strange lights on the road at dawn, like glowing cracks, then nothing. I forced a laugh and said it must have been reflections. She smiled, thanked me, and left. I closed the door, heart thumping. My eyes found the cold mix patch in the driveway, just a dark rectangle on cracked asphalt. I ran my hand over the sheet of metal I keep for repairs, then set the manila card next to it on the table. The rain drummed. Strange shapes in the wet on the windowsill, flickering neon across the yard. I sipped my coffee and stared at the card until the mug went cold. I didn't call Langford. I didn't delete the photos yet. I just sat there listening to the rain, feeling watched by the pavement itself. I was working as a park ranger at Cedar Hollow State Park that summer. It's a pretty quiet place, mostly just hikers and families during the day. And by night, well, it's mostly me and the wildlife. The park is thick with pine and oak. And there's this one area near the north end, past the old fire road, that I like to check every few days. Not for anything special, just routine patrol stuff. One afternoon, about a week before the end of July, I was driving down that fire road, just doing a slow loop on my ATV when I noticed something that didn't sit right. Up ahead, there was a clear patch in the forest. What caught my eye was how perfect the circle was. I've been around long enough to know what natural clearings look like, and this wasn't it. This patch was about 40 feet across, and every single tree inside it was dead, brittle and gray, like they'd been scorched, but without any signs of burning on the ground. The grass in the circle was yellowed and dry too, like nothing could grow there. It was strange, especially because everything around it looked fine. The trees just outside that circle were healthy, green, no disease or bugs or anything. I parked the ATV nearby and got out to take a closer look. The air in that spot felt heavier, almost sticky. I crouched and poked the dead grass with a stick. It was brittle, snapped easily, and smelled faintly of something chemical, but I couldn't place what. I pulled out my radio and called the main office to report the patch. I was halfway through explaining when the radio buzzed weirdly, a crackle that lasted a few seconds, then went dead. I checked the battery and antenna, everything looked fine, but I couldn't get a signal. Odd, but I shrugged it off. Could have been the trees messing with the frequency. I decided to head back to the ranger station and log the finding there. It was late afternoon, around 5 p.m., and the sky was thick with clouds rolling in. A few drops of rain had started to fall as I made my way down the road. When I got back, the station was quiet except for the usual hum of the refrigerator and the old radio playing some country music low in the background. That evening, after dinner, I sat by the window in the common room, looking out toward the fire road. The sky had darkened, the rain stopped, but the clouds still hung low and heavy. It was just past 9 p.m. when I noticed headlights coming slowly down the road. 2 cars passed by the station, but one of them slowed and pulled off onto the side near the area where I'd found the dead trees. I grabbed my binoculars and watched. 2 men got out of a dark sedan. They were both dressed in black suits, neat and unwrinkled, even in the wet weather. No rain gear, just standing there quietly by the edge of the woods. They didn't look around much, just stood facing the dead patch, watching it. I was curious but also uneasy. I didn't recognize them. No badges, no radios, no gear like the usual forestry or park service people. Just black suits and a strange kind of stillness about them. I wanted to call them, ask what they were doing, but the radio was still dead. After about 20 minutes, they got back into their car. They didn't look at the station or me once. The car started up, backed slowly down the road, then disappeared into the dark. I waited a while, half expecting them to come back, but the road stayed empty the rest of the night. The next day, I went back to the patch. I was hoping it would have changed somehow or that maybe I'd missed something, but the circle was exactly the same. No new tracks, no signs of disturbance. I checked the soil carefully, but didn't find anything concrete. No burns, no chemicals I could identify. Just dead trees, perfectly contained. I mentioned the men to my supervisor, but he brushed it off. Said maybe it was some government forestry thing or a weather anomaly. I didn't push it. The radio started working again the following morning, but I kept an eye out for the men in black, just in case. They never came back. Still, every time I drove past that patch after dark, I had the feeling I was being watched, like something was waiting just beyond the tree line, quiet and patient. It's been months now. The dead trees are still there, and the circle hasn't changed. I can't explain what I saw or why those men were there. It's like the forest kept a secret, and they were the only ones who knew what it was. I was down near Matagorda with my buddy Travis, fishing off one of those long rock jetties that stretch out into the Gulf. It was late April, warm enough that the air felt thick, and the water was just calm enough to see the faint ripples from mullet darting around the rocks. We'd been out there since before sunset, just soaking bait and drinking cheap beer. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky turned that deep purple where you can't tell exactly when day ends and night begins. We were talking low, mostly about fishing spots and Travis's truck that kept overheating, when I noticed something odd out past the jetty's end. It wasn't movement exactly, more like a dim glow under the water. At first I thought it might just be a school of jellyfish. The light was faint and kind of hazy, maybe 20 yards out, like somebody had dropped a lantern under the surface. I pointed it out to Travis, and we both watched as it seemed to slide slowly from left to right. Then another glow appeared right beside it. "Probably just bait fish getting stirred up," Travis muttered, but his voice didn't sound certain. The two glows kept moving, side by side, perfectly in line. Then a third one faded into view behind them. None of them blinked or shimmered like bioluminescence usually does. It was steady, like someone had stuck bulbs down there. And the weird part was, they were deep. Not surface shimmer. They were moving well below the chop, maybe 15 or 20 feet down, but bright enough we could see them clear. We just stood there watching. The lights moved in unison, a slow, steady path along the channel. Then they stopped completely. For a moment I thought maybe my eyes were tricking me, but Travis whispered, "They're lined up. 3 lights, perfectly spaced, just holding still under the water." The night had gone quiet. I didn't notice until then, but even the waves seemed softer, like everything was muffled. My line hung slack, untouched. Then, as if on some signal, the lights shifted again, this time in a wide, slow circle. The movement was so smooth it made my skin crawl. No hesitation, no little zigzags like a fish would make. We kept watching, not talking, until the lights faded out all at once. Just gone. The water was dark again, and the normal sounds seemed to creep back in. Waves slapping against the rocks, the faint hum of a shrimp boat's motor somewhere way out. We both kind of laughed it off, but neither of us turned our backs to the water. I reeled in and rebaited, but I was mostly going through the motions. That calm I usually get when I'm out fishing was gone. A couple minutes later, I heard this dull thump, like something big and heavy hitting metal coming from out past the jetty's tip. Travis froze mid-cast. We didn't see anything right away, but then the surface swelled up, not like a normal wave, but more like something pushing from underneath. That's when we saw it. A flat, metallic-looking shape broke the surface. It wasn't shiny, but the moonlight caught the edges enough to see it wasn't rock or driftwood. It was big, maybe the size of a small car, and completely smooth. No mast, no railing, nothing to grab onto visually. It rose up just enough for us to get a full look at it before it slid back under without a splash. The water closed over like it had never been disturbed. Travis let out a low, "What the hell?" but didn't finish the sentence. We stayed put for a while after that, scanning the water, expecting it to surface again. It never did. The whole time I kept feeling like we shouldn't be there, like we'd wandered too far into something we weren't supposed to see. We finally packed up when the tide shifted and the wind picked up. The walk back down the jetty felt longer than it had going out, and we didn't say much. When we hit the beach, Travis stopped and turned to look back toward the water. There was nothing but dark waves and the faint lights of the rigs way out in the Gulf. Still, I knew we were both thinking about those other lights, the ones under the water, moving like they were all part of the same thing. We loaded our gear into the truck without another word and headed inland. I remember glancing in the side mirror when we got to the highway. The Gulf was just a black line against the sky, but it felt like it was watching us go. I wasn't planning on going to the party. I work with this guy, Matt Sanders, at a small marketing firm in Portland, and when he invited me over for this casual get-together at his place, I thought about skipping it. It was a Friday night, and honestly, I was tired. But I figured, why not? Maybe it'd be a chance to meet some new people outside the office. The party was small, just a handful of coworkers and some of their friends. Matt's apartment was on the third floor of an old brick building in southeast Portland. It had that kind of warm, lived-in feel, with mismatched furniture and plants all over. The kind of place where you feel like you could settle in for a quiet night. The weather outside was chilly, typical early November rain, but inside the place smelled faintly of cedar and something sweet like cinnamon or vanilla. I was standing near the kitchen, nursing a beer, when a guy came up to me. He was maybe mid-30s, clean-cut, dressed in a plain gray sweater and dark jeans. He looked kind of familiar, but not someone I'd ever met before. He smiled and said, "Hey, you must be Rachel Lynn Peterson." I blinked. That's my full name, middle name and all. I hadn't even introduced myself properly to anyone, and here he was, saying the exact name I always try to keep to myself in casual settings. "Yeah, that's me," I said cautiously, trying to place him. "Do we know each other?" He shook his head, still smiling like he already knew the answer. "No, we haven't met. I'm Mark. I'm a friend of Matt's." Matt was nowhere near us at the moment, so I figured he was telling the truth. But there was something about the way Mark said my name. It wasn't just the formal way he said it, like someone reading off a list. It was like he'd said it before, several times. Perfectly. Before I could ask why he knew my full name, Mark did something that really threw me off. He asked, "How have you been dealing with that accident you had when you were 7? The one at the lake?" I froze. The accident. I hadn't told anyone about that. Not coworkers, not friends, not even family outside of my parents and sister. I always kept it locked away because it was messy and weird and something I didn't like to talk about. There was no reason for anyone at this party to know. "I'm sorry." "What?" I said, hoping maybe I misheard. Mark's smile didn't falter. "You know, the day you fell through the ice at Silver Creek, your mom almost lost you. That was pretty serious." I blinked hard, trying to make sense of it. "That was years ago, and, no one here knows about that." He nodded like it was obvious. "Of course, but Matt mentioned it once, and I happened to remember." I glanced over at Matt, who was talking with a couple of other people, looking completely normal. He didn't seem to notice anything strange. "Matt told you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark shrugged. "Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Doesn't matter much." Then, almost casually, he added, "It's a miracle you're still here." The room felt suddenly colder. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself this guy was just weirdly nosy. But the way he looked at me, with those calm, steady eyes that didn't quite blink like a normal person, made my skin crawl. I changed the subject quickly. "So how do you know Matt?" He smiled, but it was different now, like something rehearsed. "Oh, we've known each other a long time. He's a good friend." I nodded, but I could feel the weight of the conversation settling in my chest. I kept glancing back at Mark throughout the night. Every time I caught his eye, he seemed to be studying me, like trying to see something deeper. Later, when I stepped outside for some fresh air, I realized the rain had stopped, but the streetlights cast long shadows on the wet pavement. I stood there for a few minutes trying to clear my head. When I went back inside, Mark was gone. I asked Matt where he'd gone, and Matt just shrugged like he didn't know anyone by that name. The next day at work, I brought it up casually to Matt. "Hey, who was that guy at your party? Mark something?" Matt looked confused. "Mark? I don't think I invited anyone named Mark. Are you sure?" I described him down to the gray sweater and the way he smiled, but Matt said no one matching that description had been there. I checked with a few coworkers. No one remembered a Mark. I started doubting myself, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. But the way Mark said my full name, the way he knew about the accident, no one else mentioned, it felt too specific to be coincidence. The strangest part? A few days later, I found a voicemail on my phone. It was just static, but underneath it, I thought I heard a faint voice saying my full name, Rachel Lynn Peterson, over and over, slow and deliberate. I called Matt, but he didn't pick up. No one did. That night, I kept checking my phone, waiting for another call or message, but there was nothing else, just silence. I don't know who that guy was, or how he knew things about me I never told anyone. Sometimes I wonder if I was just tired and imagining things, but the watch on my wrist ticked the same way the old clocks at that flea market did, steady and unchanging, and that feeling of being watched didn't leave me for days. Maybe some things are just too quiet to explain. It was close to midnight, somewhere on Route 64, way past the last gas station and well into that stretch where the trees press in close on both sides. I'd been on the road for hours, heading back from visiting my brother in Greensboro. I was tired, but not the kind of tired where you're nodding off. Just that dull, worn-out feeling where you've been listening to the same radio station too long, and the road noise starts to feel like it's in your bones. The sky was clear. The moon wasn't out yet, so it was just me, the stars, and the twin beams of my headlights cutting through the dark. The occasional reflector post would whip past, but otherwise it was a dead stretch. That's when my lights caught something up ahead. At first, I thought it was just some sheet metal or maybe part of a muffler. Stuff falls off trucks out here all the time. It was maybe 100 feet ahead, dead center in the lane, catching the light in this weird way. Not reflective like chrome, more like brushed steel, dull but still metallic. I eased off the gas. I didn't want to swerve at that speed, not on this road. I figured I'd slow enough to go around it, but before I got close enough to really make out its shape, it just lifted. It didn't tip or roll or get caught by the wind. It rose. Straight up. 1 second it was on the asphalt, the next it was gone. Just shot straight into the air faster than I could follow with my eyes. I literally blinked and it wasn't there anymore. I slammed the brakes, the tires chirping a little as I brought the car to a stop right where it had been. My high beams lit up the road, the trees, the little gravel shoulder. Nothing. I sat there for a second, both hands on the wheel, listening. All I could hear was my engine ticking over and the night bugs out in the woods. I got out. My boots crunched on the pavement and the warm air felt heavier somehow. I don't know how else to describe it, just thicker. I walked a slow circle in my headlights, checking for anything. Scratches on the road, skid marks, debris, nothing. The asphalt was clean. I kept glancing up without really meaning to, scanning the patch of sky above me. Stars everywhere. No plane lights, no satellites moving, just empty. Back in the car, I put it in gear and rolled forward, half expecting to see it again just up the road, like maybe my mind had played a trick and it was farther than I thought. But the road stayed empty. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to picture the shape of it. It wasn't flat like a sheet. It had a slight curve, like a shallow bowl flipped upside down. Maybe 2.5 feet across, no visible seams or markings. Just smooth metal, the kind you'd expect to be heavy. Another 20 minutes down the road, I realized the radio had gone to static. I fiddled with the dial, tried switching stations, even switched to AM. Nothing but white noise. I glanced at my phone. No bars, which wasn't weird out here, but usually the radio still worked fine. Then I noticed something else. My dash clock was wrong. It said 12:37, but last time I'd looked, right before I saw the thing, it had been 12:22. I knew I hadn't been stopped that long. When I finally got back into range of the next town, the radio snapped back to life mid-song, loud enough to make me jump. The dash clock stayed at 12:37 until I parked in my driveway. Then it suddenly updated to the right time on its own. The next morning, I checked the front of my car just in case I'd actually clipped something and didn't notice. No dents, no scratches. But there was this fine, dusty residue on the hood and windshield. Not pollen, not dust from the road. It was almost silver in the sunlight. I ran my hand over it, and it smeared like graphite. I thought about keeping some, maybe having it looked at, but I ended up washing the car later that week. I still don't know why I didn't save it. I've driven that stretch a dozen times since then. I keep expecting to see something in the road again, but it's always just blacktop and trees. Except one night, maybe a month later, I was headed the other way and saw a pair of red tail lights pulled over right around that same mile marker. As I passed, I glanced at the driver, older guy, maybe in his 60s, standing in the lane looking straight up. His face was lit by his hazard lights, but his eyes were fixed on the sky, and he didn't even look at me when I drove past. I first noticed it the morning after. I was half awake making coffee when my phone buzzed with a notification from the security app. Motion detected, 2:43 a.m. Normally, it's raccoons or the neighbor's cat cutting through the yard, but I checked anyway. The clip was 15 seconds long. For the first 7, everything looked normal. Grainy night vision, the usual faint glow from the porch light, a little mist near the ground. Then, at the 8th second, it was like someone hit a light switch. For exactly 1 frame, literally a blink, the yard was lit up like it was noon on a clear summer day. Full color, sharp shadows. And those shadows, they didn't make sense. The porch light is on the house, angled down, so everything should throw a shadow away from it. But in that frame, the lawn chairs had shadows pointing in 3 different directions. The maple tree's shadow split into 2, stretching away from points that didn't line up with any visible light source. Even the fence had this jagged, angular shadow that cut across the grass at a weird diagonal. The next frame went right back to night vision like nothing happened. No fade, no flicker, just night, then day, then night again. I sat there at the kitchen counter staring at my phone for a long time. The timestamp didn't skip. It read 2:43:08 on the bright frame, 2:48 on the next. No missing time. Around 9 a.m., I went outside to check the yard. Nothing looked disturbed. Chairs were in place, the gate was shut, the grass was wet from dew, but otherwise untouched. I even checked the porch light to see if maybe it had flared or something, but it's an LED fixture. They don't suddenly flood a yard with daylight. The weirdest part was the shadows in the clip. I tried to figure them out. If there were multiple light sources, maybe from neighbors' yards, they'd have to be blindingly bright to make the footage look like that. And I'd have seen them through my bedroom blinds. But I didn't see or hear anything in the night. I saved the video to my phone. Later that day, I showed it to my coworker, Eric, during lunch. He's into photography, so I figured maybe he'd notice something. He rewound the clip a dozen times, pausing on the bright frame, zooming in. He didn't say much, but at one point he frowned and asked, "What's that?" In the upper left corner of the frame, just above the fence line, there was something I hadn't noticed before. Not a shape, exactly. More like a smear of light. It wasn't lens flare. It was too sharp at the edges, like a solid object reflecting light. Except if it was an object, it wasn't shaped like anything I recognized. That night, I stayed up later than usual, sitting in the living room with the porch light off and the blinds cracked. Around 2, I muted the TV and just listened. The neighborhood was dead quiet. No cars, no voices, just the occasional creak of the house. At 2:40, the air outside felt different. It's hard to explain, but it was like the silence had weight. No distant hum from the highway, no rustle from the trees. Even my fridge seemed quieter. I stared out the window toward the yard, but nothing happened. By 2:50, I gave up and went to bed. When I checked the camera the next morning, there was nothing, just a squirrel darting across at 4 a.m. Over the next week, I found myself checking the footage every morning, hoping to catch something, but it was always normal. Still, I started noticing small things when I was outside at night. Twice I caught myself looking at the grass and realizing my own shadow didn't quite match the angle of the porch light. One time it was stretched way too far, almost to the fence, even though I was only a few feet from the steps. A few nights after that, I was taking the trash out when I thought I saw a flicker across the lawn, like a single strobe from far away, lighting everything for a split second. It was faint and fast enough that I wasn't sure if I'd actually seen it or if my eyes had just adjusted weird. I went straight inside and pulled up the live feed on my phone. Everything looked normal. I watched for 15 minutes and didn't see anything else. I still have that single bright frame saved. Every so often I open it and zoom in on different spots. The fence, the trees, the smear of light. It's crystal clear, sharper than the camera's usual quality. Like whatever lit the yard also boosted the detail. The more I look at it, the more I'm convinced the shadows aren't just wrong in direction. Some of them seem to bend, not curve like a natural shape. Bend, as if the ground under them wasn't flat in that instant. I've replaced the batteries in the camera, checked the wiring, even swapped the SD card. The system works fine. Nothing like it has happened again. But every night, I still find myself glancing at the clock around 2:40, just in case.